There is such a profession as a veterinarian. This activity is covered in manga, novels, and movies. However, there are few who are really interested in this profession. That's why in most veterinary clinics, a person can only meet one veterinarian. This was what the guy who was quickly getting ready for work thought about. He got to the Bureau of Animal Sanitation. On TV, they said that the reason for the economic downturn was the illegal spending of funds by the top. The disposal of evidence goes all the way to the final point. Another series of quick checks were made. One of the workers picked up the remote and turned off the TV. He said he didn't like all this talk about procedures. Another guy was writing something down on a piece of paper. He said he would need to give one multivitamin tablet. A hand was placed on his shoulder, and he stopped filling out paperwork. The man asked him if he had caught a cold. No wonder, since he was the only one working here, and working tirelessly all day long. The guy smiled and said no, he was fine. A regular headache, although one thing was bothering him. So this time, he would definitely help regardless of the circumstances, and would be responsible for the consequences. He continued to say that, moreover, the textbook approach is not absolute. After all, a person is much more complex. This guy's name is Kazami Shingo. He is 26 years old. Shingo stood up from his seat and said that the main thing here was to be confident in himself and not to lose heart. That he still had a lot of things to do, and first of all, he would have to visit one village farm. Shingo left the office. At this time, in the garden of the capital of the Asator Empire, Amber Palace, a man was sitting in the gazebo. His son, Julius Roll McGee, approached him. He asked his father with a smile why he called him Emperor of Astora, Shizes Rolla Maguire. The man drank some tea and told Euless that he was entrusting his country to him, and as soon as he died, Euless, as the crown prince, would immediately ascend the throne. Shizes continued to say that he did not doubt him, and even trusted him. However, he is only the prime minister now. The emperor angrily asked Julius what they were saying around him now. The boy smiled and replied that regarding today's report, he wanted to note that it would be extremely useful to him. Julius asked his father that he probably knew the legend about Marbit. Skizes responded in surprise that, of course, who did he think he was if he didn't remember this legend? The emperor added that on their continent, Tornadia, there were 4 states between which there was great hostility. Julius said that Marbit is considered to be a country of others, but it is not so. In a short time, a small country grew into a mighty power. Julius added that he had read enough about it and thought that this legend from the stories could help them achieve prosperity in their country. Skizes asked with interest how this knowledge would help him in usurping the imperial throne. The prince cried out excitedly to his father that everything was wrong. On this continent, from east to south and north, countries were constantly fighting among themselves to achieve and ensure universal balance. However, Skizes in front of his son and said that the West was interfering. The prince replied that this was undoubtedly true. This country is simply a collection of clans, the heirs of which try to maintain, as far as possible, the already established borders. Julius continued to say that it only takes one person to appear, and the whole army suddenly becomes more courageous. However, efforts to maintain peace are not enough lately. The emperor asked, "What is the reason?" Julius answered wearily that there could only be one reason, and that was Marabit. His powers as the future emperor of this continent will be very useful to their country. It is very dangerous to develop Zadoria. Julius said that because of this, he intends to challenge Marabit, which is located in the north. The emperor wondered with interest what this guy's intentions were. Skizes angrily shouted that he was talking nonsense. Merbit specialized in conducting covert warfare. If it came to that, he would send a spy to the west to dispel the so-called remnant of fire. Julius replied that the foolish priests were repeating the same mistakes as previous countries. Rumor has it that Merbit is now greater than ever. The emperor asked which one they should call in that case. Skizes asked whether it was a carpenter or a peasant. They already had plenty of blacksmiths and warriors. The prince replied with a smile that it would be a healer, and one who deals with animals. Shingo was packing his things into his car. He sneezed loudly and said it was probably from the cold. The guy put the last box in the truck and slammed the trunk. The guy said that, however, his cold would not go away so easily, and why he had fallen ill with bird flu. He felt awkward. Shingo got into the car and said that at this time, tens of thousands were secretly spent on tens of thousands of things. He added with disappointment that he would have liked to have saved much more. The guy pulled out of the parking lot and drove to his destination with a smile. Suddenly, Shingo heard a voice asking him why he wanted to look at everything in such a place. He jerked in surprise but said nothing. Shingo approached the tunnel. The voice started talking again. He asked what the guy could hear because he could. The radio started to static and the guy drove into a tunnel. Shingo screamed in horror, asking what was that? Where was the head coming from? He continued on his way, but tried to hear something else. Shingo exhaled and said in horror that it was a hallucination. Constant work was so tiring for the eyes. No, it was probably all because of the amount of work. It was some kind of curse. He grabbed his head and remembered how he had to go to the pigsty. One of the workers grabbed him by the collar and shouted, why he, just a healthy guy, did not kill them. He was a vet. He should help animals. The man loudly asked that it was just an animal doomed to suffer, so why didn't he kill it? Shingo said tiredly, that man again. Why can't he stop thinking about this incident? The guy stopped his car and got out. He said that these extremes are everywhere. Shingo heard a loud scream that came from the tunnel. He looked ahead in surprise. Shingo thought it was some strange sound, like an animal growling. It was probably best to leave the headlights on. Maybe you should walk a little. The guy walked a few steps, when suddenly the ground under his feet began to crumble. Shingo started falling down. He screamed loudly what was happening. He tried to grab onto something, but he couldn't. In a couple of seconds, everything was empty. Shingo landed on the ground. He happily shouted at the ground, but what happened? He fell to the ground to touch the ground. The guy wondered what kind of place this was. He saw the shoe of the man who came up to him. Shingo looked up and saw Julius and a few others. The prince asked him with a smile how he was feeling. His Holiness. Shingo looked at him in surprise. Julius asked him in English how he felt. The guy couldn't utter a word. The prince thoughtfully said that they would hope that they would still be able to find a common language for communication. He added that it was very funny. Shingo thought in shock what was happening now, and also what to answer this man. He was on the track a second ago, and now he was like on a film set in Hollywood. And who was this handsome guy? Shingo turned his head and saw maids, fairies, and dragons. He noticed the girl. One of them said that she was tired. She called Chloe and said that she had worked well today and had also fixed her health. The girl added that she could go now. They would call her as soon as they needed her. The girl turned and looked at Shingo with a sweet smile. The guy wondered why she was looking at him so intently, and also what was wrong with her eyes. They were too shiny. Shingo turned his head away and asked the prince in embarrassment why she was looking at him like that. Jules said that answering with a red face seemed to be a bad character. He asked the Japanese was still suitable for communication. The prince said that he wanted to introduce himself. His name is Julius Roll Maguire. He's the crown prince and also the prime minister of the country. They are in the outskirts of the capital, namely in the Imperial Gardens. Julius asked him if he could tell him his name. Shingo asked in surprise that he wanted to know his name. Julius awkwardly said that there was someone else there. Shingo shook his hand and replied that his name was Kazami Shingo. The prince said loudly that he would tell right away. Julius asked if he would deign to adapt to their world and give all his strength for the prosperity of this country. Shingo scratched his head and asked in surprise what he meant. Shingo shouted loudly that even so, it was impossible to announce something like that so suddenly. He has a daily life, a family, and a job. The prince replied that it was true. Julius continued to say that, however, he was guaranteed food, clothing, and housing. Shingo shouted at him to stop. Let's admit that both this call and this conversation are real. The guy asked, what? Then how can he return to the previous world? Julius replied that since they had summoned her, they could return her. But summoning Marbet was an extremely difficult art. The prince continued to say that a heavy burden fell on the shoulders of the summoner. Who summoned him will be recovering for at least a month, so his return is impossible at the moment. Shouted in disbelief that this was a problem. He had just started working. Not showing up without a good reason was the same as being fired. The prince replied that it seemed they hadn't done very well, and that in that case they would have to fork out for a reward. The boy awkwardly said that after all, he was just a veterinarian. Shingo thought that he was asking too much from such an insignificant person like him, it was not easy for him. Julia said that since she wanted to save his long life, he was not so hopeless. Shingo clenched his fist and wondered in surprise that they had been watching the whole time. The prince bowed and told Shingo that he had chosen his words incorrectly. He asked for forgiveness. He wanted Shingo to save the suffering people and living beings. Jules continued to say that they didn't understand everything either. Plagues, famine, and on top of that, poverty. He had heard that Shingo could do it. The prince added that they couldn't solve everything on their own, and that became a problem. The first to die were children, and without them, the future is impossible. Abandoned, orphaned children somehow earn their living, and in the worst case become slaves. He continued to say that their world was mired in these problems. He is not asking to save them from hunger and epidemic. He just needs the help as much as he can. The prince said that he is really sorry that they called him like this. He can voice his complaints to him. He asked to provide support to people who need it. Julius shouted loudly, begging to save the life of this world. Shingo closed his eyes and replied that he understood everything. Everyone looked at him happily because he decided to stay. Shingo said that the nature of animals is connected with the work of a veterinarian. Countermeasures against hunger and epidemics are also among his duties. The guy added that until the preparations for his return are completed, he will help where he can. If there was anything he could help with, he needed to see it. The girl ran up and hugged the boy. She cried out joyfully that she thought so, Your Holiness. She believed he would respond just like that. Shingo blushed at the girl's actions. Julius smiled broadly and replied that it was true. How good that he had answered that way. Well, he had another job, so perhaps he would go. The prince continued to say that if he had any questions, he could turn to the Kydorian priest. If he listened to her, everything would be fine. He added that from today on, this charming girl would be his servant. Julius said that if he wanted to contact him, he just had to contact Claes. These knights would be stationed around the perimeter. He wouldn't have any big assignments until the night vigils. He could order whatever he wanted. The prince added that they were now his slaves. Julius waved his hand and said goodbye, that he expected success from him. Shingo wondered wearily if he had been dragged into something intense. The girl called the boy. She joyfully cried out that from now on, throughout his stay, she would rely on Vache. The boy hesitantly said that yes, he hoped so too. Shingo wondered what Vacha was. The girl blushed and said that she bit her tongue. She hoped for his support. Shingo thought that one single vet could save the entire country. Yes, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible. A month later, a girl came up to him and called him several times. The guy looked at his notes he had written before in surprise. The girl asked hesitantly that he was feeling unwell. Shingo answered with a smile, that no, everything was fine. The girl said that it was good if that was the case. They would then get straight to the point. She placed a huge pile of books on the table and said that today's study materials were already long overdue. She added that he should memorize the contents of all these books. Shing thought in fear that yes, this Kydorian priest dressed in white was an angel. Kurole wrist, a devout teacher from the devilish Sparta. Shingo continued to reason that he never thought that he would end up in another world. And here, at his 26 years old, he would also study. The girl took him into the room and said that she was now his. The guy looked around and said that he looked gorgeous. Shingo asked hesitantly if there were any plans for what he would do here now. The girl answered with a smile that they would probably start with what they needed to learn. Shingo asked what he needed to learn. The girl replied that, to put it briefly, she would learn the life of an observer in scientific terms and the training of military arts. The main component of anything is thorough study. Without it, nothing will work. She added that learning has always been the main thing. Shingo raised his hand and awkwardly said that the other world, how to say, in this world there is magic. The guy asked if it was possible to just study everything with its help. The girl replied that it was not magic, but spiritual commandments. For the most part, it was light manipulation of natural phenomena. There were those who could use hallucinations and hypnosis, however. Kazami-sama would not be able to use it. Shingo asked in disappointment what this meant, just cramming. The girl replied that, yes, only cramming. He asked how long he would have to cram before he would stop. The girl slammed the table and shouted that she was offering to finish everything in a month. She would pass on to him everything she had learned up to that point in an instant. The guy fell on the table in disappointment. The girl screamed excitedly that she would call a doctor right away. He was overtired after all. The guy looked at the mountains of study material he had prepared in advance. He said that it was not necessary. He was also a doctor. That's it. Now he would die. The girl asked loudly why he was so ill. The guy answered that it was not literally how to say, it was a figure of speech. The girl screamed that lying was cruel. Shingo thought with tears in his eyes that every day from morning to night he was drowning in studies and this was still happening. He continued to reason that he had two teachers, the one who had already communicated with him before, Kuro, Ulysses' butler, and the special knight of the imperial family, Clace. Shingo thought that Clace, who uses the spiritual commandment of ice, was, in keeping with the image, like an ice sculpture, and his training was done on a mechanical level. He continued to reason that Kuroe, like a satiating warmth, teaches him language and common knowledge. Clay said that Kuroe sign can control the spiritual commandments of the positive energy of the sun. Shingo thought that maybe he could use something too, although it was just a joke. He came to another world, so one special gift is enough for him. And so the days pass one after another. Clay entered the room saying that he wanted to talk. In fact, this evening, he would like to ask him to go outside for a while. Shingo jumped up from his seat and loudly asked him that he was serious about this. Clace replied that yes, they had some incident. Shingo took his hands and looked at him with tears in his eyes. The boy thought that he wanted to run away because of his studies. Shingo happily shouted that it was true. Staying in the room all the time was bad for his health. Since they were counting on him, he had no choice. He asked what had happened. Clace adjusted his glasses and replied that it was necessary for his lordship to get used to it, but at the same time they wanted to know his opinion on it. That was what Jula-sama said. He continued to say that the other day Kazami-sama was studying creatures that do not exist in his world. Among them is a kind of griffin. Shingo asked that griffins have an upper half, like an eagle, and a lower half, like a lion, right? He was told that he was absolutely right. Shingo asked that it seemed that there were only 10 winged dragons and 3 griffins. They are very rare, right? Crace answered that yes. In the Empire, they are valued as air troops. They are used, but initially, magical beasts did not obey people. Shingo thought they were some kind of military fighters. The guy asked what happened to them. Clace replied that something had happened. One of the specimens had suddenly died. Valuable property was lost under everyone's nose. It would be possible to punish the responsible owner and end the investigation. He asks to determine the cause of death. He would also like to be sure of the safety of the other griffins. The butler asks the boy to take on this matter. Shingo said that although they are parts of a whole, punishing the responsible owner is a bad idea, although what kind of punishment? The guy asked that, given the danger of complete extinction, the death of one individual is already a serious problem. Then, really, death. Clace replied that, of course, the death penalty. The man said that 1 griffin rider equals 1 squadron. He holds several hundred human lives in his hands. He added that if you take even 1 life, there is nothing that can atone for this guilt. Shingo said thoughtfully that he understood. Well, they should go and take a look. The guy added that if he finds the reason, he should give this person a chance. If he finds the cause of death and a cure, it will save their remaining griffins. Shingo said that, moreover, it will affect the lives of several thousand people. He asked if that wasn't so. Clace replied that it was so. He listened to his opinion. The man said that he understood him. With his permission, he would convey this to Jula-sama. He asked that Kazami-sama allow him to go to that place immediately. Shingo replied that he did. He was going to do so. Clace bowed and said that he would prepare his knights to escort him to the place. Once all preparations were completed, he asked that the people standing outside be informed. The man continued to say that if he needed anything, he should immediately inform them. The boy turned his head and looked at Kuro. He approached her and asked if it was okay if they continued their training another time. The girl replied that she had no objection. Kuro said that it was because His Holiness was evolving to save people. The boy walked up to the table and took out a box. He asked the girl what these Marbit holinesses were, right? He still didn't quite understand what kind of people they were. Karao replied that according to official records, only 4 people were summoned. The girl continued to say that she had heard that His Holiness, through an excellent strategy, had expanded a small northern country into a large state. Kuroe added that the second Sama, how to say it, is famous for defeating a dragon and returning from the battlefield. Shingo laughed and said with a smile that it was a dragon. He would like to see it. The girl loudly asked that it was a dragon, the one from the legends. Koro said that the dragon was too brilliant. He did something that sowed confusion in nature, being present as a mediator. She added that the conditions for riding a dragon and other magical creatures are completely different. Kuro grabbed the boy's hands and joyfully shouted that it didn't matter. Kazami-sami and that hero had the same origin. Shingo awkwardly asked that even if she said so, he didn't have any special powers. Right. He's nothing more than a veterinarian. Anatomy is the only thing he's pretty good at. Shingo looked at the box and said that it was true. It looked like the stuff in the car had migrated here too, so they had an anatomical kit. There was definitely no anesthesia here. He had heard that griffins were aggressive. Could they just attack? Kuro replied with a wide smile that everything was fine. There was no need to worry, since Kazami-sama was his holiness. Shingo felt uneasy that too much was expected of him. Clace was walking through the corridors of the castle. One of the knights noticed him and shouted loudly for him to stop. Even the butlers forbade passage. His friend hit him on the shoulder and said that he should not do this. He told him that this was the special knight of the imperial family, Clace-sama. He was acting as a chamberlain and was also a close confidant of Prince Julius and had real political power. Clace walked up to the door and knocked. They told him to come in. Prince Julius was sitting at the table in front of him. Clace said that he asked for forgiveness for the intrusion. After his lordship's report about sending griffins to the farm, one condition appeared. Would he deign to listen to him right now? The prince replied that yes, the work he was doing now was prepared for tomorrow, so there was no problem. Julius asked when he would start reporting what was happening now. Clace said that Shingo said that if the cause of the griffin's death was not found out by dawn, he asked that the punishment of the owner responsible for it be mitigated. Julius replied that he thought there would be no problem with that. The preparation of a new person in charge would take some time, and other people would take care of the rest of His Holiness's demands. The man looked at the prince carefully. Julius asked with a smile why he was treating him so specially. Something was bothering him. Clace replied that if he would allow me to speak frankly, indeed, if one listens to the stories of those who preceded their holiness, one expects much from a new arrival. But this is the first time they have dealt with a doctor. The man continued to say that despite not having any achievements, Yulasama still cared about him. He couldn't understand it. Clace, some sheets of paper. Julius said with a smile that Clace only needed to observe, and that was why it would be enough to gain his trust without giving in to pride. No, he expected a lot from him. Clace looked at the documents and replied that these were changes and mortality of the population, a diagram of the causes of death. The number of respiratory and digestive disorders increased and became the main cause of death. Julius nodded and replied that it was so. Apart from healthy adults, the number of those affected by the epidemic was growing every day. The prince asked if he understood that. Clace put the documents on the table and replied that if people did not get infected, the losses would not increase. However, it is obvious that this is impossible. Julius said that it is interesting that the carriers of the disease are animals, and the method of treatment for each species is different. Clace said that parasitism and infection occur when a certain number of elites accustomed to fighting kill a magical beast. Well, that's true. An amateur can't help here. Julius replied that a doctor for animals is a veterinarian, specializing in diseases that have developed into epidemics and, naturally, he also knows how to treat animals and restore populations. Let Clace imagine. Julius said that if everything goes according to his plans, illness, and life, how strong will be the influence of the veterinarian? If the original source of the epidemic is destroyed, another one will immediately appear, won't it? The common sense of this world rejects all the numerous historical knowledge about agronomy and medicine, and perhaps this will force Shingo to cooperate. Clace said that only if he was a truly talented person. However, whether he was a doctor or a merchant, he could only make smart eyes. So he gathered his entourage of assistants like him. It's temporary, but even if they helped him more, Shingo would probably still be superior to them in many ways. The prince smiled and said no, that's what he wanted. He was waiting for the power of Merbit to make the country move forward, something Shingo could achieve. if the power of their weapons was still legendary. He added that when he thinks about it, his heart jumps out of his chest. Since Clace is also going, this is Shingo's letter of recommendation. The prince took it out of the drawer. Julius said with a smile that, although no. After all, this is the long-awaited first job. And yet, should he go too? Clace asks permission to inquire who it is from. The prince replied that he had not said, from a man he knows, that he wishes to become an influential merchant and his political opponent. He is ill now, and if possible, he would like to receive treatment. Shingo and Kuroe are currently in the Asurtor Empire, the capital. The girl shouted at Shingo to come here. The boy replied that he would come right away. Suddenly, he saw a fairy and asked in shock what fairies were. Then he looked to the other side and noticed a performance. There was nothing there, but a fire appeared. What was happening? Next to him were servants from Kazami's personal guard. The girl, Nora, and the guy, Savvy. The girl said with a smile that it felt like His Holiness had not mastered the language properly. They were discussing the main character. Shingo happily said that there were so many unusual things in this world. Kuro asked with interest if there were such things in his world. The guy answered that there were only cats and dogs, and there was also a lot of the same vegetation. The guy pointed at one of the plants and asked that it was called oleander. Kuraure replied that yes, he was right. It seems that the previous holinesses brought its seeds from his world and did not change the name. There are also cereal plants. Shingo said that it was surprising. It seemed that many things here were connected with that world. The girl answered with a smile that yes. Already close, while talking they had almost reached the place where the griffins were bred. A man met them and happily said that he was waiting for Shingo and asked them to follow him. They approached a pair of griffins. Shingo thought happily that he was seeing real griffins. The man told them that he was asking them not to go beyond the fence. Even if it was for a short time, he could not guarantee their safety. Kurai replied with a smile that they understood. She looked at Nori and Savi and said that even skilled adventurers have difficulty becoming a griffin's partner. So, for now, she and Kazami-sama will watch from afar. Shingo had already gone behind the fence and was petting the griffins. He was saying that they were good boys. Everyone looked at him in shock. No one had ever approached the griffins so easily. The guy said that they turned out to be very friendly. Kurao screamed in horror that griffins were fierce creatures, so you need to approach them carefully. The griffins put their paws on the boy's back. Everyone was horrified, thinking that he was about to be eaten. Kuroe turned to Nora and Savi and shouted that they had to save him. Savi asked if the griffins could be cut. Nora excitedly shouted that it was not necessary. The owners would immediately come running here. The worker shouted that that was why he had said not to go in. Kuro screamed that there was no way out. She would do everything in her power to save Kazami-sama. Shingo approached her and asked what they were talking about that was so dangerous. Everyone jumped in surprise. Everyone thought that he had already been eaten. Shingo stroked a griffin and said that they might notice that their nose and ears are sensitive areas, just like humans. He added that because of this, even if they attack, you can defend yourself. It's best not to touch other areas. Kuroe said that magical animals exist in nature without meeting humans. She continued to say that from newborn babies to adults, they are hostile to humans. Shingo replied that it was normal for predators to be friendly if they were well fed. Kuroe said that perhaps, as the legends say, Marabitsama is loved by magical beasts because of its special power. Shingo stroked the griffin and said that they are so cute. The guy added that to begin with, there was no one suspicious among these two griffins. They had to look at the one who had died unexpectedly. Everyone went into the barn where the griffins lived. Shingo said that it happened here. Kuroe said that before he started investigating the cause of death, she wanted to ask him something. The boy asked what it was. The girl replied that they would like him not to damage the longest wingtips. Is that possible? Shingo replied that it was no problem. But were these feathers really used for decoration? Kuroe replied that they were used for that. But there was another reason. She said that people and magical beasts have a special organ to control spiritual commandments. Even if the beast dies, when processing this organ, they make additional weapons with the spiritual commandments of this beast. Shingo thought that was understandable. Magical beasts actually had a lot of really useful materials. After processing, These materials could be used to create various equipment, just like in the game. He turned to Kuro and said, "Okay, then we should get started right away." Shingo added that she would have to keep a record. Kuro asked, "Sure, but what should she keep a record of?" Shingo got excited and shouted that of course it was the autopsy report. He wanted her to record where and what pathologies were found so that he could check the field. He opened his medical toolbox. This attracted the attention of a girl who was standing nearby. She quickly approached Shingo, which scared him. He hesitantly took a small knife and handed it to the girl. Shingo stood there for a moment and remembered that she seemed to be called Liz. She stood and looked at the knife because she had never seen one like it. It had excellent sharpness and a good symmetrical shape. Shingo asked her in a distant voice if she was having fun, having already thought that she was too much of a weird child. Liz replied with satisfaction that she was having fun. She liked such things. In the sense that they are interesting, Shingo should forgive her rudeness and continue. He replied, puzzled, that it was fine. Shingo is about to start performing a post-mortem autopsy, but those who don't want to see it better leave. He's about to perform a thorough open surgery on the entire body and internal organs, so some people might get sick. She said that her spiritual commandment specializes in healing. She would like to see Shingo, a real doctor, at work in his meticulous work during an autopsy. Shingo started to talk through his actions so Kuroe could write them down. He checked the outside first, so now he's going to open the abdomen. There's no ascites as such. No hemorrhages in the heart either. He continued to say that there was hemorrhagic inflammation of the stomach, but no serious parasitic infestation was observed. He would look at the source next. The girl behind him smelled like raw meat. Shingo didn't notice the other people's reactions, so he asked Kure to get the thread. Shingo said after a while that there had been a successful conclusion. He continued that their structure was almost no different from the big cats, the felines of Earth. So my own knowledge will be enough for me. Shingo held the notebook in his hand, in which Kuroe had recorded his actions during the autopsy. He had examined almost everything, but none of it was life-threatening. Kuroe suddenly interrupted him and said that Shingo could not find out the cause of death. He smirked and said that he could see her perfectly well. Besides, Kuroe should have realized that by now. Shingo suddenly asked what they feed the vultures. Karalik looked at her subordinate, who replied that they feed them a round-haired rabbit, a herbivore. He was surprised by the round-haired rabbit. Shingo asked that they were feeding them in the pen, and when the griffin suddenly died, his physical condition was getting worse and he was dying. These rabbits were no longer there. The subordinate asked incredulously, "How could this be?" Shingo replied that it all boils down to one thing, and that round-haired rabbits' feed is not just specially grown meadow grass. It also includes properly mown hay. He thought that he had gone crazy at that moment. Kuro called out to Shingo and said that now would be the time for the round-haired rabbits to graze and the time for the griffins to hunt. She added that there were no rabbits yet. Would Shingo like to see them? He exclaimed that they would really be fed the same way as before. Kuroe hesitantly said that yes, breakfast was not that long ago, but it seemed like it was time to feed them. Shingo interrupted her with a shout and said that this was not the way to do it. She asked what they should do then. Shingo replied that this had to stop. They would stop them right now. They had to tell everyone not to let the griffins attack the rabbits under any circumstances. He turned to the man standing next to him and said that all the haulers needed to be gathered right away. Let them be divided into those who would drive the rabbits into the pen and those who would pull the grass out of the feeders. And they would go to the hunting grounds right away. So Liz and Nora go with them. The girls shouted what would be done. After a while, they ran to the hunting grounds. And although they were the ones who should have walked behind, the girls were more eager to help than Shingo. And they were even dragging Kazami Shingo, who was 26 years old, by the hand. He was shouting that his body was no longer young, so the load was too much. Let them stop. But they did not listen to him. After a while, after leaving, Shingo thought that these girls made him feel his age. He shouted where the round-haired rabbits were. One man shouted that so that the griffins could hunt, they let them out to pasture. Shingo looked towards the pasture and saw clumps of fur. Surprised that they were indeed round-haired rabbits, he exclaimed to Koro that where in the world were they wild animals? She replied that even if they looked cute, they could also be dangerous, magical creatures, right? Liz, standing nearby, said that she apologized for interrupting the conversation, but the griffins had already begun the hunt. One of the griffins spread its wings wide and soared above the ground, raising a large gust of wind. Kuroe yelled that it was terrible, so she and Shingo needed to duck quickly. Shingo exclaimed, "Why? They weren't flying here, were they?" Kuroe shouted that this was not the issue. The problem was in the spiritual commandment of the round-haired rabbits. Suddenly, the round-furred rabbits jumped off the ground and began to develop high speed. Shingo shouted, "So that's what happened." Kura said that when rabbits are attacked, they reflexively release a shockwave. Kuroe yelled if he was okay. Shingo said yes. It was good that it was just a very small, round-furred rabbit that had arrived. She yelled that she would take the rabbit right away. He quietly said that he was okay, so let him leave the rabbit alone. So, there were still 6 left pulled out of the fence. 3. Liz and Kuro would take 1 more each, but there would still be 1 left. Suddenly, he saw that one of the round-haired rabbits had been grabbed by a griffin and was getting ready to eat it. The round-furred rabbit in Shingo's arms suddenly screamed and began to cry. Shingo thought that perhaps it was his mother. But in a situation like this, she could not be saved. Now that the predator was hungry, there was simply no way to take the prey away from him. Suddenly, Shingo realized that there was one good way to do this. He raised the rabbit above his head and said that the main thing is not to make a mistake and then everything will definitely work out. He swung and threw the round-furred rabbit with all his might straight at the griffin with a shout forward. The griffin was already preparing to dine on his prey, when suddenly, a round-furred rabbit flew into his face. The griffin fell from this sharp blow and was defeated. Shingo ran to the exhausted rabbit and shouted that he had succeeded. He tried to lift the rabbit, but he could not. Suddenly, 2 adult griffins appeared in front of Shingo, having heard the noise from the blow to their fellow. Shingo took the rope and said that it looked like the rest of the griffins had arrived too. One of the griffins attacked Shingo, but he easily dodged it and tied up both griffins. He shouted that this was catching large animals in practice, so no matter how hard they tried, both griffins would not be able to untangle themselves. Shingo said that it was time to finish. Now, except for trying to fly, there was no other way to escape. Suddenly, he heard the words of an unknown spell that hid the griffins. He was taken aback by this and saw Liz in front of him. Shingo excitedly asked if it was really she who used a magical, no, spiritual commandment. He was very grateful to her. Liz answered that she helped because there was an order not to harm the griffins. Shingo thought she was cool. Away from him, Kurawi shouted at him, saying that it was very reckless, and what would have happened if the griffins had hit him. Shingo squatted down and said that yes, it was very dangerous. Kuro saw him walk over to the injured round-haired rabbit that his child was sitting next to. She smiled and said that if she used her spiritual commandment, they could heal the wound. Shingo was surprised and asked if she could heal wounds too. Kurai said yes. It seemed that Shingo would be seeing this for the first time. He jumped up to her and asked what the principle of her treatment was. He was very interested to know. He continued to say that treatment after death, or, for example, a tumor, too. Everything returns to its ideal state, or scars remain. Kurua replied that it usually depends on the user of the spiritual commandment. It can only speed up the healing of wounds. She was not interested in the principle and detailed process, so she does not know, and she is very sorry. Shingo said that it was okay, everything was fine. He understood. Now they had to go back to the barn where the autopsy was performed. After the disinfection, you must show me your spiritual commandment. Kurao asked incredulously what kind of disinfection. She said it was like some kind of flush or detox, right? Shingo replied that no, detoxification is detoxification. He wondered if there was a concept of deviation from hygiene standards. It didn't seem like there was a common understanding of microorganisms and bacteria in this world. Shingo said he would explain everything in more detail a little later. Kuroe said okay. She would be happy to listen. The 2 of them went to heal the round-furred rabbit's wound. They came to the barn where the round-haired rabbits lived and saw a crowd of people. Shingo asked Kuro that it was a bit noisy here. She didn't think so. 2 people standing near the crowd called out to Shingo and Kuro. The man shouted that he hadn't seen him in a long time. How was he doing? He had just brought an audience for his debut. Shingo thought it was Julius who had come. He said it was like a courtroom. Did Shingo's lawyer find evidence that he was right and revealed the secret? At the same time, the guards brought in a very beaten man. Shingo gritted his teeth and said that Julius was giggling so much alone. What a restless guy he was. What was he so happy about? Julius raised his hand and said if Shingo could explain the griffin's death, if so, he could free this man standing next to him. Shingo thought that maybe he could save just one person's life. Wasn't it strange for him to be happy about that? But if he said it exactly the way he wanted, he raised his hand and shouted that it was okay. He would show the evidence. Shingo turned to the workers and asked that they had brought the rabbit food as per his instructions. Shingo suddenly pulled out an unknown plant from his pocket and said that this was the answer. Kuroe exclaimed and said, "What about the oleander they saw on the way here?" Shingo began to explain. In fact, oleander contains poison. Even 50 millimoles of dried leaves per 1 kilogram of body weight of a creature is a lethal dose. If they continued to feed it to animals, they would die from poisoning. Shingo continued. He said that quantity makes poison. In other words, oleander may be a medicine, but it was originally a poisonous plant. Griffins hunted round woolly rabbits, which ate it, in the worst case, like that time, could simply die. Kuroe exclaimed that this plant was so dangerous. How horrible. Shingo said that from now on, the animals cannot be fed with anything. Also, the workers should sort the grass better. If necessary, it is better to use forage from private lands. Julius said that this is how it is. I understand. He accepts Shingo's arguments and will make arrangements for this matter. Julius turned to his butler and told him to investigate the matter again. If it turns out to be true, the suspect should be released. One of the workers shouted, "What should they do with the round woolly rabbits that had already eaten this grass, Mr. Doctor? How would they recognize them?" He continued, "What if they unknowingly fed the rabbits that had eaten the poisonous grass?" Shingo replied that seriously, it will be better to renew the entire herd. He added that he wanted to study the local animals, so in any case, he was going to get a couple of specimens of round woolly rabbits. A rabbit landed on his head. Shingo suddenly remembered that he had to cure the round furry rabbit's mother. He apologized for forgetting to do it earlier. He walked over to the wounded round wool rabbit and began to cut away the fur around the wound. Shingo said he thought disinfecting the wound with ethanol would be enough. Shingo told Kuro that they would see how her spiritual commandment worked later. Julius approached them and asked if they really had a baby round-haired rabbit. Shingo replied that yes, it was almost eaten. He then turned to Kuro and asked if she could now continue the spiritual commandment. She was ready. Kuroe placed her hands on the wounded round furry rabbit and began to preach. Incredibly quickly, the wounds began to heal under her words. Shingo waited for the right moment and told Kuroe to stop. That was enough. He said that now we need to wash off the disinfectant that he used before. Kara was surprised by this. Julius, standing there in bewilderment, asked if Shingo had understood anything. Shingo replied that Kara's spiritual commandment, or perhaps it was a magical power that made wounds return to their previous state by themselves. Shingo said that disinfection is a measure to destroy microorganisms invisible to the eye. These measures can prevent wounds from festering. On the other hand, weakened cells in the wound also die. He added that if they observed the healing after rubbing the disinfectant solution into the wound, they would be able to discern what qualities the spiritual commandment had. Now Julius replied that he understood the explanation. Shingo turned to Kuro and said, "That was it. That was enough." He said that Kuro's spiritual commandment was like a healing power. Right. The little round woolly rabbit was very happy about his mother's recovery and jumped on Shingo's head. Julius said they seemed to really like this place. He said that, by the way, he remembered that the griffins had actually had babies recently. Because of the poison, they can't drink mother's milk. So he thought of letting Shingo take care of them. Julius added that he could look after this round woolly rabbit just in time. Shingo was taken aback by the application and couldn't utter a word. He recovered from the shock and said that no, he was of course interested, but large predatory animals. He hadn't dealt with them yet. Julius said that Shingo had played with the griffins before. Julius said that after they were born, he would take care of them. They could get used to human society. Shingo thought that it was true. If it were possible to breed tame magical animals, the country would be burning with desire to get them. Shingo continued to think about whether it would be possible to squeeze the pads of their paws. Julius said that they would settle it there. He added that, by the way, since his first job was over, He had a small gift for Shingo. He started to walk away and shouted in the distance that this was a letter of recommendation from the nobility. It would be useful to Shingo in case mercy is not for the people, as they say in his world. Shingo was surprised by this awkward gift. Kuroe happily shouted that Shingo's abilities were recognized again, so they should try even harder. Shingo thought that after all, he'd been dumped with some problematic work again. Shingo stood in his robe, sorting through various test tubes with reagents, conducting chemical experiments. Liz was very upset by this boring task and asked what Your Holiness was doing. He replied that she didn't need to address him so pretentiously. Let her be herself. Liz asked if that was an order. He didn't answer, so she took it as an order. Liz unbuttoned her jacket. She said it was so hot in here. Shingo said it was too loose. She spoke to him sharply and asked what he was doing, collecting mice so that it was impossible to breathe. Shingo didn't answer. Liz continued the conversation and asked what kind of notes these were. She didn't understand anything. He thought it would be better if she didn't understand them. Shingo said that the notes were in Japanese and English. This is a table of practical application. What changes do you get depending on the mass of the poppy? How pure the morphine can be extracted? He added that the final goal is to obtain morphine sulfate hydrate, or morphine hydrochloride. Liz said she did not understand anything. She put the notes on the table and walked over to the table with the test tubes, asking Shingo that they most often used herbs as medicine, but she had never heard of them being boiled, mixed, and ground into powder in such a strange way as he did. Shingo replied that medicinal herbs have their effects because they contain special substances. For example, the oleander from the Griffin incident. He also said that depending on the amount, it can be both a medicine and a poison. That's why its purpose is to make it easier to measure the amount of the substance needed. Liz grimaced and asked if it wasn't enough that these herbs were effective. Shingo thought for a moment and replied that, for example, if she wanted to add salt to a dish while cooking. He continued, the ingredients you can use to do that. It could be human sweat, rock salt pebbles, or regular salt. Shingo added that if you use the first two ingredients, the taste will be strange, but the concentration and amount of the substance will not be easy to determine. That will be a problem, right? Liz said that if we talk about her, it is very tedious, so she can eat food without any seasonings. He probably knows that they say they are crazy. Not hearing Shingo's reaction, she simply sat down on a chair and said that she didn't care. Let him finish cutting faster, and they would just go back to the room because it smelled too bad here. Shingo said that she was too impudent and that she couldn't win the battle with her mind alone, so the only way out for him was to prepare for it in advance. Moving away from the conversation, he said that the first portion of morphine had been received. Liz asked what he was going to do about it, drink it or something. Shingo exclaimed that of course not. First, he uses it on these mice to find out the amount of anesthesia needed. He added that it was so potent that even if you took a little more than the recommended amount, it would become poison and kill the mouse. Liz said that in other words. Despite the fact that he treats animals, he uses them for tests. And even so, he is revered. What a contradictory existence. So it turns out that even a serial killer can be called a hero. Shingo said that if they don't do tests, they won't know the true effect of what they call medicine. What she says is not a mistake. If their results don't match, it will become a curse that will kill them. It's too ruthless a profession. However, thanks to these mice, he will be able to save people and animals dear to him. He added that in any case, whatever he said, it would not change the essence. But he wanted to save as many lives as possible. Suddenly, the door handle began to jerk sharply, and a bang was heard. Kuro ran into the lab and shouted that this is where Shingo was. She was so worried when she didn't find him in his room. Shingo said he had a good reason. Kuroe didn't listen to him and started dragging him to the exit, saying that they only had a little bit left, so they should go to school. He said that school was important, of course, but a little more and morphine. Shingo yelled at Liz to look after the mice. She replied that she understood and added, Your Holiness. Shingo wondered where her earlier behavior had gone. After some time, Kurao was able to drag Shingo back to his room. She began to tell him a huge amount of information, so Shingo kept thinking that even if he was an honored guest, he was still a completely ordinary person. Kuroe said that the morning classes had come to an end. He was very happy about this. because he was completely exhausted. She interrupted his happy thoughts and asked if Shingo wanted to go on an excursion. Shingo was very happy and asked if they were really going outside. Kurao said that talking to a lot of people is one of the fastest ways to consolidate the material covered. Suddenly, Clace entered the room and apologized for the intrusion, saying that he had something to talk to them about. He put cups of tea in a teapot on the table and asked to be allowed to start the conversation. Clace said that there was actually another order from Julius. Shingo asked if it concerned him and received a positive answer. Clace said that in the eastern part of their empire, Asutora, in the province of Ravan, there is a city called Hydra. He continued that recently there were suspicions of ghouls emerging there. He needed to investigate and prevent their spread. Shingo said incredulously, "Ghouls. These ghouls," he said what they were like. Clace said that they were former people or animals, but changed by the thirst for blood and meat. The method of spreading is called Hudora. Infection occurs through contact with bodily fluids. Shingo said that if it was the commandments, he had no chance. But if it was an infectious disease, that was his area of expertise. Right. Does Clace know the exact process of the disease? Clace said yes. The first symptoms after infection resemble a cold. Then the person begins to complain of severe nausea and loses self-control, gradually becoming furious. After this, an unpleasant odor begins to emanate from the body, and they begin to crave blood and meat. Clace said that a healthy being only needs to come into contact with a ghoul once to spread the infection. That's why the Imperial troops are already preparing to burn out the suspicious area. Shingo asked what it was like. Rabies. Clace replied that this was why they were asking him for help. This city was the center of national defense. If they carried out a purge, they would not be able to do it with minimal losses. Shingo smiled and said that it seemed like it was his area of expertise, so he would try his best. What he really thought was that he wanted to save as many living beings as possible. He continued to think that even if it was just simple diligence, this path should lead him to the ideals he desired. Clace said that he thanked Shingo. The departure would take place early tomorrow morning. He added that he would be accompanied to Hydra by members of the servant knights who had been to those lands. It would be easier for them to know lands. It would be easier for them to navigate the terrain. Shingo asked what kind of servant knights they were. Clace replied that the outskirts of the province of Ravan are owned by Count Donnie Osto Ravan. These are servants who were part of the slave squad in the battle on his territory. Shingo was taken aback by the word slaves. Clace continued and said that they are called knights. Of course, he can rely on the commander of his personal guard, Liz Watsavi. Besides, Count Donnie is quite an influential aristocrat. Clace believes that he would like to see Marvit in person at least once. If Shingo needs to prepare something, he asks him to feel free to give orders to the maids or guards. Shingo thought that this was how the slave system existed in this world. Clace bowed and said that he was leaving now. Shingo turned to the others and said that he wanted to learn more about ghouls first. Then perhaps he should bring a microscope, dissection tools, and some medicine. He asked the maid to prepare the medicine. The maid replied that yes, she would cook. "Your Holiness," she begged your pardon, but if he was going to leave, couldn't he take these cubs with him? Shingo was taken aback by this turn of events. Suddenly, a baby griffin and a baby round-haired rabbit jumped out of the basket at him. He said heavily that it was feeding time. Yes. The little baby griffin was called Guri, and the little baby round-haired rabbit was called Guri. The maid said that there would be no problem taking care of the adult rabbits and slime, but she said that these babies were just scared. Feeding his magical creatures to a simple person like her, Shingo thought they were very attached to him. You can't leave them at home. He told her he understood that. He was their owner, so he would definitely take them with him. She said she was very grateful. Kuroe asked what kind of slime Shingo had. He said he had recently found it while walking and had taken it with him. She asked incredulously that he had taken a slime. Shingo said he thought it might be useful for composting. Kuroe asked, "Compost?" Shingo started to explain what compost was, but at the same time, Kuroe and the maid thought that no one could see slimes. Besides, the mouse incident was still normal. They thought that Shingo was just a little unusual. But maybe he was weird. Late evening at the mansion. The man reported to Liz that the group that was hanging around the mansion was captured. The second in command of the servant knights, Grenford Savy. said that they had been taken out of town and destroyed as ordered. What would be the order for those remaining at their bases? Liz said to get rid of everyone. All they've done so far is let them slip away. She will go to one of the bases personally, so she leaves command of the rest to Grenford. Grenford asked who will be in charge of protecting the mansion. Liz replied that the one in white was answering, by which she meant Correa. She added that the mansion had enough security. Liz said with a grin that choosing girls for security was, of course, more convenient. She looked at the member of the servant knights named Quina. The girl said with tears in her eyes that standing in front of a man's room in the evening was... Liz interrupted her and said herself that she meant preferring to be near a hero. They probably took her because she was cute. If so, she thought it couldn't be helped. It was a privilege of her position. Quina screamed that it wasn't a privilege. Nora jumped up next to her and shouted that then she should be taken instead. Liz said that she was part of the punitive squad. Her application was rejected. Nora became very sad and said that how could that be? Liz added that besides, security is boring, but you can have fun during an operation. Nora objected that he is not an executioner or a princess, that he would not hurt a fly. Liz said, so that's what it is. She replied that this guy was so carefree, so it could be possible. But for that, she would first have to defeat Kuroe with her feminine charm. If she had such an intention, she would become a serious rival. Nora got really mad and said that it was true. Kuroe is a beauty. She can do everything. She is feminine. Too formidable an opponent for her. Quina screamed that having fun with a man was somehow... number? She didn't want to. She would fight. Liz thought that no matter what she said, Quina was afraid to fight. She looked at Granford and asked him what he thought about it. He thought that she was always like this, she asked, and there was no way to get out of it. He said that Quina was originally registered as a member of the intelligence service. He said that her fighting techniques were highly specialized. Like Liz said, it would be better for them to stay as security guards at the mansion. Liz approached Quina and said that this is how it is. She's still a child for now, but if she decides that she needs to fight or use the commandments, she needs to tell her. Liz will be in touch with her today. She shouted for everyone to get to work. The next day, Liz stood at the door and told Shingo that she had brought his clothes. He asked if it was necessary to pass it on. She replied that she had assumed he would prefer to dress like a knight so as not to stand out. Shingo replied that that was how it was. Suddenly, Kuro appeared next to him and said that she would help him. He replied that it was not necessary, and it embarrassed him. And besides, since it was complicated while he was changing, he would consult with Liz. Kuroe left, and Shingo told Liz that he was counting on her. But suddenly, she threw all his clothes at him and jumped onto the bed. She said that this bed was so big and soft. And why couldn't she serve Shingo in the evenings? Liz said they were on guard duty 24 hours a day, so he could call her anytime. She could shirk and he could fantasize, killing two birds with one stone. Shingo said you don't invite a girl to bed who isn't your sweetheart. Liz replied that his behavior changes a lot when there is someone around, yes? In any case, let Shingo get dressed already. Shingo said that he seemed to be dressed, but only the sword was a bit heavy and the belt was a bit loose. Liz said that Shingo, like many other nobles, turns out to be a weakling. She added that even if something is decorated, but he will not use it for its intended purpose, it will not look good either. The conversation turned to the knife. Liz started showing the motions of attacking with a knife, and he realized that she wanted Shingo to get it. He picked up his drawer and pulled out a surgical knife. Liz said to give it to her as soon as possible. She grabbed Shingo's hand. The girl pulled out a knife, holding it to his throat. Liz said that he didn't realize, like many others, that they thought the same way he did, that even insects don't know when they'll die, and she wanted him to be careful on his way forward. Shingo stood up abruptly and said that in that case he would be a carnivorous plant. Liz said that was nice, and now maybe they could eat. Shingo yelled at her not to think that he was easy to eat. She didn't believe him and said who was he telling this to? Shingo said that she was only saying this now because the priestess wasn't here right now. Kuro quickly came over and apologized for the intrusion. She asked if they were done with their preparations. Liz said that he had put on both the breastplate and the sword so easily, as expected of him. Shingo, dumbfounded, tried to deny it, but was unable to say a word. Kuroe said that they were leaving then. In the wagon, Shingo thought he was finally free. But this Marabit. They call him a veterinarian, and they are counting on him. He can only do what he can. Right now, he doesn't know what he can do, but he is sure that with his persistence, he will cut a sure path for himself. The main Kadorian temple. The priestess turned to Kuroe and said that for her merits, she was honored to receive the title of companion, who should protect and serve Marabit. She replied that it was a great honor for her to dedicate her life to fulfilling her duties. Being a servant of the Kadorian way is very honorable and respected by everyone. Among the previous Marabith, no one was alone, so the white slave Kuroe is a symbol of her high education in the humanities and military sciences. The priestess turned to Kuro. She asked if Kuro realized that her duty was not only to protect his holiness. She replied that she did. That was why she had studied many sciences to the limit. The priestess said that it was self-evident. Well, then she must listen carefully. The companion of Marabit is the one who guides his holiness on the right path, the person who protects him from the influence of bad people. The priestess continued. Kuro is free from the influence of the state, so she will be closer to his holiness than anyone else, and she will lead him under her protection. This will prevent unnecessary conflict between countries. She said that the companion is always chosen from the opposite sex. Kuro is old enough to understand the reason for this, isn't she? Shingo and the others continued on their way to Hydra. Nora shouted that he was already in sight. Shingo asked if this was the Hydra. Kuro said yes. She said that it was probably where the Hydra who defeated the dragon once lived. She said that 4 generations ago, this Hydra, with the help of oil and flame, drove out the previous owners of the lands. And it seems that in honor of this, the city was called Hydra. Shingo replied that that was how Wo was, I see. Kuro added that these lands also bordered a neighboring country, so many people gathered here. After some time, their carriage entered Hydra. At the entrance to Hydra, Donnie, Asto, Rowan, and his wife Sandra were already waiting for them. Donnie greeted everyone and thanked them for the journey they had made. They had done an incredible amount of work to get here. He couldn't even imagine the difficulties they had to overcome along the way. Shingo awkwardly said that he sincerely thanked Donnie. His name is Kazami Shingo. He came here to research ghouls. Donnie was surprised that Shingo already spoke the local language fluently. He said he was sorry for keeping them in such a place. He was sorry. He asked them to go to the castle, where he would give them a warm welcome. They entered the castle, and Donnie told them to make themselves at home. Shingo thought that his apartment looked like a puppy dog kennel compared to this. He looked at the painting and thought that it depicted his wife, son, and maybe himself. He was embellished quite well in the painting. You wouldn't recognize him right away. Donnie said that they collect a lot of things, but none of it matters much. Shingo thought he hadn't heard anything about it. Donnie said that since the day was almost over, how about dinner after a hot bath? If he felt like it in the evening, he would put his lovely daughter to work for him. Shingo replied that no, it wasn't necessary. He preferred a quiet, relaxed atmosphere. More importantly, he wanted to hear about the damage caused by the ghouls. Donnie said no, all these demons are just popular gossip. He added that he hoped that Shingo would prefer to rest today, and that tomorrow they could talk about their affairs. He said that with the power of your holiness, they would surely quickly deal with these rumors. Donnie took the mugs of tea and handed them to Shingo, saying that this tea was ordered especially for his arrival. Shingo thought that instead of this, he would have liked to learn about ghouls as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Guri and Guro were bored with nothing to do. Everyone else went to wait for the evening. Shingo came out in very nice clothes and thought that the bath was great and he felt very refreshed. Suddenly Liz and Koro said that they would take him to the dining room. Shingo saw the girls. He thought it was an evening outfit. What a feast for the eyes. He looked at the table and thought that a lot of effort had gone into the preparation of the food and the alcohol. It tasted simply delicious. Shingo was about to eat all these snacks when Donnie approached him holding a sword. He started talking about his past and the history of this sword. Shingo mentally asked Kuroe to save him. At the same time, Sadra came to her and said that he started it again. She moved closer to Kuroe and asked if they should engage in their girl talk. Donnie started talking about his sword, but Shingo came up with a better idea. He took out a bottle of alcohol and thought that Donnie was strong when it came to alcohol. But he was not weak either. So they would drink until one of them could no longer continue. Shingo thought that this was not just bragging. He would not lose in drinking time and drinks. He hoped that Donnie would lose to him. After some time, Shingo was able to defeat Donnie and went out into the corridor. He thought that just a little more and he would just give in. It seemed that he had already drunk enough. Liz asked if he should lend her a shoulder. He said just to the room. Liz said he drank well, and she probably wouldn't mind having a drink with him too. Shingo said there was a difference between drinking for pleasure and drinking out of duty. She dragged Shingo to the bed and told him that if he needed anything, he could call her. At this time, in Sandra's room, Sandra told Kuro that she too is in a difficult situation. She needs to accept His Holiness's feelings, and it seems that she is taking it seriously. Kuro replied that she was simply not leaving Shingo's side as compensation for the weight of responsibility placed on him. Sandra laughed and said that she had serious thoughts. She said that if she were Kuro's mentor, she would give advice. Sandra entered the Ron family by mutual consent. She said that it was beneficial for both parties to achieve their goals. It can be perceived as a political marriage. Sandra took Kuro's hands and said that their situations were similar. Sandra also understood these confusing feelings. His Holiness is both a Marabit and a commoner, so if she tries hard, she will definitely succeed. Korole replied that if it was Shingo, she didn't think it would be that simple. Of course, as his companion, she was willing to give both her soul and body. But considering the achievements of their previous holinesses, what compensation would be more appropriate? She continued by saying that, besides, if she didn't live up to Shingo's expectations, she wouldn't be able to stop being afraid. But if, while she is shaking with fear, they find a replacement for her, then Sandra said that it was normal to feel afraid. However, Kuro was very pure in soul, even too pure. This does not mean that she is the only one who feels these feelings. She said that nothing would start until Kuroe did something. She opened the bottle. The woman began to give Kuroe something to drink. The lady asks for a little drink first. The girl asks her to stop. After emptying the bottle, Sandra said that Kuro first needed to learn to understand the mindset of the honorable gentleman. Sandra said that there was no need to think about how exactly to pay compensation. Whatever they did, their basic desire remained the same, and respectful rapprochement with the masters was the foundation of the foundation. She said that since they were talking about Kuroe's manner, she should do what she could do now with all her heart. Besides, Kuroe might not get the chance to do her job anymore. Therefore, Kuroe must take advantage of what she said. When His Holiness is dissatisfied with something, she must make up for it. This is what they have in common with similar circumstances. Sandra added that besides, if he fell in love, all her worries would become just plain stupidity. But first, it's worth changing these clothes for something more suitable. Kuro said that it's not worth it. Everything is fine as is. Guri and Gura had played enough and were resting next to Shingo's bed. At this time, Shingo himself was thinking that in principle it was not bad as it was, but it would be better for him not to remain in this position until the morning. Suddenly, he heard a knock. From behind the door, Kuroe asked if he was asleep. Shingo replied that no, he was not asleep. She said that she wanted to talk. Shingo was surprised by Kuroe's offer. Shingo and Kuro were sitting on the bed. She decided to break the silence first and asked if he could. Kuro said that if it didn't bother him, then he should do as he wanted. Shingo thought this put him in an awkward position. Suddenly, Kuro shouted that there was nothing unusual about it, and pushed Shingo. She suddenly came to her senses and began to ask for forgiveness. Shingo thought for a moment and said that he should tell her about himself. Kuro asked if Shingo really was a veterinarian in another world. She knew almost nothing about it, so he couldn't tell her more about it. Shingo smiled and said that as far as he understood, there were no veterinarians in this world. Then he would explain in practice. Veterinarians are those doctors who specialize in the treatment and care of animals. He said, war horses and military hounds. They needed to be looked after and bred. A specialized institute was opened to teach this business. Agriculture, breeding of war horses, fighting diseases that attacked cows and horses, preventing the spread of diseases from animals to people. Now veterinarians are even involved in treatment, and now everything is as it is. Kuro asked, that is, veterinarians do not treat people. Shingo answered that no, they do not treat people. Kuro asked why. He replied that this required a lot of memorization. and therefore it would be difficult unless they specialized in one thing. She said that although it seems that healers and doctors in the past treated animals too, speaking of which, it was probably their way of life, but there was no fundamental research. Shingo said that it was also because they were living beings. The basic treatments were similar, but the application was different. Animals couldn't tell you about their symptoms or help ease the pain, but if they study them well, they can find out what the cause is, in the organs or in something else. That is why it is so important for them to acquire specialized knowledge. With it, they can also conduct tests that will increase efficiency. Kuroe interrupted Shingo and asked if it was important for a veterinarian to be present in this world. Kuroe said that because of the epidemic, she thought that people should be saved first and animals second. But Shingo interrupted her and said that it was all true. Humanism could not be wrong. He added that to solve the problem at its root, someone with the relevant knowledge was absolutely necessary. Veterinarians are not just people who treat animals. They prevent diseases that can be transmitted from them. They increase the success of breeding and the elimination of hunger, take care of hygiene and, therefore, the environment. They perform many roles. Koro asked how hygiene was that. Shingo replied that it was simply to keep pets clean, thus preventing the spread of diseases. Diseases caused by something minor, a trifle, are usually impossible to notice with the naked eye. Elimination of these trifles is called hygiene. Kuroe said she thought that the place where a person lives has a much greater influence than hygiene. There are also those who have a strong heart. They recover quickly from illness. She added that illnesses are punishment for a bad lifestyle. The guy said that diseases originate in thoughts. Kuroe shouted that everything would be fine. Some pathetic illnesses would not be a problem for Shingo's strong heart. Shingo thought it looked like she idolized him. He asked Kuro what she thought of him. She was taken aback. A girl said that he is the most amazing person. She respects him for not abandoning people and for knowing a lot of things that they don't know. Kuroe said that if he encountered trouble along the way, she would rush to his defense. Shingo said he was just doing what he had to do. She approached him and asked him what he didn't like about being an eminence. He replied that he would no longer use a higher status than others. He wondered what was wrong with Kuro today. Shingo exhaled and said, that's why he will do what he can. He wants to save these troubled lives. Just one. Shingo said that there were lives he couldn't save in the other world, and he was glad and grateful that he could lead her path. Kuroe said that being summoned to another world, it could be dangerous for him here. What would he say to that? Shingo thought for a moment and said that he understood everything perfectly well, and that he had a bad feeling about the tasks of this time. He said that one way or another he would do everything he could here and then probably return to his world. Kuroe whispered that he couldn't do that. She thought that Shingo had decided not to stay in this world. But the reason she was here was because she had to make sure that he was attached to this world and stayed here. Kuroe thought that this was the reason why she, as a devotee, wanted to have a deep connection with him. She pushed him back, but he managed to twist away at the last moment and stay in place. The girl asked him not to think about anything. He asked her to stop for a second. Shingo ran to the locker and offered her some water to calm down. Kuroe said no, she would only drink wine. Shingo said that he had already drunk enough, so he couldn't have any more. Kuro begged him to drink with her, so he agreed. He asked again if they could drink some water, but she was adamant. They drank. After drinking the drink, Kuro told Shingo not to think about anything. She wants him to do whatever he wants with her. So Shingo took her hands and began to feel for a pulse. Kuro thought at first that he was meditating. Shingo said after a few minutes that as he thought, her heart rate had increased due to the influence of alcohol. He said that everything else seemed to be exactly the same as in his world. He started to move Kuro closer to the door. Kuro yelled at him to wait and asked what this was like in his world. Shingo replied that she herself told him to do whatever he wanted. It was for medical research, so she didn't have to worry. He felt her arm and said that the shape of the collarbone and the placement were similar. Corral screamed that it tickled. Besides, he must do this as a punishment for this precocious girl. Shingo grabbed her by the collar and said that it was not nice to tease elders. She knew that. Moreover, Kuroe was a pretty sweet girl. He opened the door and pushed Kuroe out, telling her that it was late and she should let her body rest. He wished her good night. Kuroe said that she was thrown out. She said that she had to establish a connection with Shingo to convince him to stay. Yes, she had to, until she was rejected by him. Kuroe began calling Lilu, the high priestess of the Kadorian church. She asked her to answer her, because Kuro wanted to tell her that she would not be able to serve Shingo. Lilu asked sullenly, was she really asking this now, when it was already the middle of the night? Lilu thought that even though Kuro was an empty shell, if she continued like this, she wouldn't last long. Lilu said that whether she told her this news or not, Lilu couldn't do anything, whether Kuroe understood it or not. Suddenly, Kuroe shouted that Shingo was very good, but it had nothing to do with what Lilu said. Lilu sighed and said that then she shouldn't bother her anymore. Besides, Lilu assured that everything would be fine. That was enough to calm Kuro down. Kuroe yelled that no, it wasn't okay, and nothing was okay. She said that it was the top priority, so if there was a better candidate to take her place, she would gladly do so. But she doesn't want to take that position anymore because of her selfishness. Lilu sighed sullenly and said that Kuro is acting like that because of what those old men told her. Lilu doesn't ask her to stop obeying, but to just continue to stay close, not to doubt, and to return to her room. If it's so hard for her, then let her use brute force to achieve specific goals. Kuroe is the only one who can make men and even minotaurs work hard. Now if Kuroe understood, she should go to her room and let Lilu sleep. Kuroe shouted that she didn't fight against demonic beasts, and if she did, Shingo would hate her for it. Lilu gritted her teeth and thought that this was what happened when a girl's head was filled only with the teachings of the Kadorian church. Lilu got up from the bed and said that she understood, seriously. Lilu opened a portal and said that why should she do this and it's so late? Shingo was sleeping soundly and dreaming of a soft, fluffy futon. What could be better? Suddenly, someone's foot hit him and Shingo screamed that it hurt a lot. The Lilu yelled at Shingo to get up. Karao became worried and asked if it was necessary to hit him. Lilu yelled at Karao sharply to be quiet. Shingo was the one who made a mistake. Lilu turned her head and told Shingo that he was serious. He made her wake up while he was lounging in bed. Shingo thought that this woman was really there when he came to this world. He added to his thoughts that she seemed to be quite a respectable person. Perhaps she had heard about their conversation last night and had come here to offend him. Shingo squatted down and begged for forgiveness. Lilu said, "Okay, then let him accept it." She picked up Kuro and pointed at her. Shingo asked incredulously what she meant. Lilu said, puzzled, that he was telling her to do whatever he wanted with her. She was his property. He could love her, do whatever he wanted with her. Shingo said, anything but that. Lilu angrily shouted that he really didn't understand anything. She was doing this of her own free will, so he shouldn't worry about anything. She added that he should go away from here and not disturb her sleep. Shingo asked, what was it like to sleep? Lilu kicked Shingo sharply and said that she had already said that, so he should answer properly. Shingo whispered why he was in this situation. Kuro shouted for Lilu to stop. Lilu said she was serious. She never thought that such an unsociable person would be his eminence. Shingo asked what she meant. She said her name was Lilu. 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 Liest Ventia. She was a priestess who summoned him to this world. Shingo exclaimed, "Then why is she here?" Lilu screamed, "How is that why?" She was sleeping, recovering from the summoning, when suddenly she was disturbed because of him by this stupid girl. Lilu instantly jumped through space and time to be here. Lilu took Kuroe in her hand again and said that she was asking him to spare her. She also asked him to raise her and think of her as a flower from now on. Kuroe might die if he didn't love her enough and take care of her enough. She added that Kuroe was an idiot. Shingo shook his head in confusion and said, "Okay." He agreed. Lilu suddenly opened a portal and threw Kuroe into it. Lilu told her to wait outside for a bit. She and Shingo needed to talk about an adult. Lilu exhaled and sat down on the bed. She said that Shingo, or whatever his name was. Lilu said that there was a reason why she became so reckless about Kuro. The teachings of the Kadorian Church are a widespread religion on this continent, and their headquarters represents an autonomous region located on a mountain range. Its strength lies in the call of unique people. It is ecclesiastical, and therefore, in order to make a profit, they rely on the call. They do this for the greater good. When they summon, They balance ideals and power. But at the same time, the existence of a person who can summon unique people puts the balance she mentioned in jeopardy. Lilu added that it was like if he got married in this country. He could be linked to her under the pretext of protection. That's why Kara thinks that her unique person would not be seized by specially authorized authorities. She wants to establish a physical relationship with him so that the Kydorian church can protect him. Or that's what the elders told her. Lilu said that this girl is incredibly honest. Apparently, she has been thinking about this for a long time. Lilu asks Shingo not to judge Kuro for this. Shingo replied that it is clear, so she really has her reasons. He said that she was so desperate that she even looked a little pathetic. Lilu said loudly that that was it. Kuro could come back into the room. She went behind the door and said that Shingo realized that Kuro had already left Lilu, and he must be the only one caring for her now. Shingo interrupted Kuro and said that he wanted to tell him first. He would not touch an underage girl. Kuro shouted that she was already 15. She was already an adult. He replied that she looked at him as his eminence. But when the time comes, and she sees him as a man, then Shingo will give her his answer to her proposal. Shingo added that he didn't want her to overdo it, but that Kuroe should do what she could. She yelled that he didn't think she was useless, and that he needed her. He replied that it would be hard for him to be here without her. She would still be there, wouldn't she? Kuro happily shouted that, of course. Lilu said that she understood now. His status as a holiness confirmed. He still wants nothing to do with the country or the church. Shingo exclaimed, "What was she talking about?" Lilu happily replied that nothing. She just saw something very pretty. He screamed, "Why did she lie down in his bed? And where should he sleep now?" Karuga, from behind, said that it was early morning, so Shingo could continue his training. He said that he should study even though they were in Hydra. Karuga said that she could help Shingo gain knowledge about this world. She shouted that it meant she wouldn't back down for Shingo's research. He was horrified and thought the devil had returned. Kuro happily said that they would first go through the repetition of what they had already learned. Meanwhile, in the night servants' barracks, Kina was sitting behind a weapon box and quietly crying. Suddenly, Nero appeared next to her and asked what she was doing in such a place. Quina said that she knew about it. Everyone succeeded, and she failed the task again. Nora answered her that she had good information for Quina. She's sure Quina just hurt that guy, right? Quina said yes. She just bought a sword, but she still hasn't learned how to use it properly. Quina stood next to the man and said that she had unconfirmed information, that this was all he had. The man replied that it was true, and she was a servant, wasn't she? If she just let him feel good, then he could tell. The man added that he needed a little more information about where the ghouls lived. Kina exclaimed, "What does this man mean?" She had to endure this to get the information. Suddenly, she hit the man and screamed that no, she did not agree. Quina said that she did not like men. Nor said that she really did. Quina lived in a wealthy family until she was converted to the ministry. Nora added that it was good that he was arrested anyway. But now Quinn is a servant. Nora said that a servant who cannot prove his worth will be thrown out. They live in a world where they have no right to complain about anything. She can't live in denial of obvious facts, so she must find the strength within herself. Quina replied that she had heard this many times. She said it was too much to bear, but she had no useful qualities. Nora asked to think about it. After a few seconds, she said Quina was cute and had an attribute. She added that she had things that even Nora herself didn't have. Quina screamed that she wasn't cute, and that the lightning attribute wasn't uncommon. Nora smiled and said that wasn't true. She really was cute. Nora hugged Quina and said that she was sure of it. And one more thing. Quina is guarding Shingo's luggage, and she can talk to him when he comes back. That's really cool. Quina asked if Nora was jealous. She replied that Shingo was the first and only one who treated them like people. And she wasn't joking. Because if it was Shingo, then she wasn't tricky. Because if it was Shingo, then she was really happy. Quina just gave a blank look. Nora hit her and said that it was definitely enough, so there was no need to get upset. They started arguing again. Granford said they shouldn't go after them. Liz said they should have gotten their weapons first and then come here. This was a very good chance to destroy her. The next morning, Liz entered Shingo's room and apologized for intruding. She saw Kuroe and him and thought that they were a very contradictory couple. Liz came out of her thoughts and said that she came to report important information. They were ready to do the ghoul research. Shingo shouted that it was a great job. He was glad. That was what he should be doing. He turned to Kuro and said that he thought he really wanted to do the research. He was allowed to. Kuroe said of course. His humble servant Kuro would do everything to make legends about him. Shingo turned to them both and said it was time to go explore. He said he decided he would do whatever it took to save people. How useful would his knowledge of ghouls be? They needed to test it. They were heading to the city. They arrived at the outskirts of Hydra, and Shingo told Liz to lead the way. She said yes. He said she could speak here as usual. Kuroe said she had no objection to that. Shingo said they would first need to meet with the official who controlled that section, or the mayor. He added that the first thing they needed to do was confirm how severe the ghoul's infection was. Liz said that information like that hadn't reached the officials. Shingo asked, puzzled. Liz replied that the ghoul is not so easy to defeat. The infection is transmitted through touch. She said that the residents do not want to fight them, afraid of catching the infection, and they also do not want to spend money on mercenaries to protect them. Or rather, they do not have the money. Besides, the mayor's office, with all the money and power, relies on luck. Instead of letting them out to fight, they think it's better to lock them up and wait for someone to take care of the ghouls. Shingo said that's how it is. He blurted out that maybe it's for the best if Donnie decides to burn the city to the ground. But even if the mayor's office finds out about the incidents, he doesn't think they'll dare to punish the residents. Shingo added that when the country learned of the infection, the country's army would burn everything in the city, including the fortunes of the local officials. Liz responded that even though things had gone this far, Donnie still couldn't make up his mind. She added that that was why he hoped Shingo could do something before word got to the government. Shingo replied that it was indeed an unpleasant story. But what about the residents? Liz asked if he had even listened to her. The army would burn everything, including them. Shingo was taken aback by this information. She added that they did not know the cause of the disease, but they knew that ghouls were dangerous to humans. Liz said that the uninfected would live for a time in an isolated place with guards and supervision, but they would have to live like servants. Kara asked if they either died in a fire or lived like servants. She added that it was cruel. Shingo clenched his fists and said that by sacrificing a few for the greater good, killing the villagers who might be infected so that the disease would not spread, he added that it was risky and costly, just like him being here. Liz asked that the best way to save her was to kill her, wasn't it? Karao told her not to say that to her. Shingo replied that it was okay. If he didn't kill them now, there would be many more victims. And yes, he knew that this was just an excuse to justify himself. But even if this pressure continues to weigh on him, he still believes that by sacrificing a few, more lives can ultimately be saved. Right, he just wants to save as many people as possible. If there were people who were going to be destroyed, then he would do what his heart told him and try to save them. Liz replied that since he was talking so much, she hoped he had a plan. Shingo replied that he thought so. But if the ghoul's disease was truly infectious, perhaps he could create a cure to prevent it. However, the necessary material is needed from someone who is fully infected or from the source of the disease. So, where can he find people who are in the last stage of infection? Liz said she heard that the slums southeast of here were infested with ghouls and were barricaded. Shingo said that was great. If they could clear up the doubts and create a cure, that would save them, right? He added that they had no time to lose then, and now they most needed to prove to the army that the epidemic would be cured in a few days. Shingo told Liz to lead the way. She said incredulously that she would be fine, but the slum was filled with bandits, so it was not safe. Karai yelled at Shingo and Liz not to worry. She would not let anyone touch Shingo while pulling out iron fists from her sleeves. She yelled that it was her time to do her job. Liz said that if anything happened, she would try to protect him. Shingo said that they should go then. They approached the barricaded part. The knights shouted that the captain was coming. Liz thanked them for their good work. She turned to Shingo and said that her subordinates would help with the search. Kuroa asked what was bothering Shingo. He said yes. In his world, there were many microbes that could manipulate their host and spread disease. For example, the rabies virus. They harm the human nervous system, seriously undermining it. This causes a person to bite everything that is in front of his eyes. Then the virus is transmitted to the bitten and spreads further. Shingo added that, in the case of the parasitic worm, they intentionally stick to the outside of the leaf, in the sun, becoming food for birds or herbivores along with the leaf. They allow themselves to be eaten, expanding a habitat in the same way that some fruits rely on birds to scatter their seeds everywhere, along with their waste. But Shingo is worried that in the case of a ghoul infection, they can move while actively decomposing. If you think about it logically, this is quite strange, because nerves and muscles, when decomposing, cannot move. He said that's why they are harder to control. There must be a reason for this phenomenon. If their purpose is to use scent to attract someone, then there is a good chance that they were infected by an animal. Shingo said, if so, then this is his case. As a veterinarian, he will take the animal's measures against this. Kuroe said that, in other words, it's time to show Shingo's power, right? He replied that he simply wanted to ensure the safety of residents as quickly as possible. Liz brought them in and said it was time to investigate. There were ghouls here, but she didn't know where. Shingo said the place smelled really bad. At least they were paying some attention to hygiene. It's no wonder this place is full of infections. Corral tried to talk to some people, but they all tried to run away and hide from her. She said that she felt like they were just being watched. Liz told Kuro to relax. They were on the isolated side. It was a waste of time asking everyone around in clothes like that. Shingo said the situation here was tense. Liz said that catching any child in asking is easy. She grabbed a child who was digging in the trash and wanted to ask him. When Kuro asked her to stop for a bit, she said that Liz can't hurt children. Liz said that they are not children. They have a man instead of a little boy. So he should stop being so fearful. Liz said it was time to get to the point. He probably didn't understand why they were isolated, right? So they were here to help solve the problem. So they need information to do this. Plus, she smells a strange odor from his friend behind him. He won't be able to fool her nose, or he wants to deny everything. Liz turned to Shingo and asked him to take his turn. He put on his gloves and said it was okay. He just wanted to treat the boy's wound. Shingo asked to see his wound and saw a large bite. He asked if he had a fever or if he felt weak. The boy replied that he was just cold. Shingo took his hand and bandaged the entire area of the wound. He told the boy not to tell or show his wound to others. Okay. Kuro asked if she needed to use the treatment. Shingo said no. That was enough for now. Liz went to the other boy and said he was doing this for his own good. If he helped them, they would give him food. Not a bad deal, huh? The boy screamed that no, he wouldn't tell, because after he did, they would destroy his brother. Liz said that if they were going to destroy them, they wouldn't have captured him. They would have just burned the place down. She added that they took the time to come and talk to him. He still doubts her words, yes. The boy said not to tell it, okay? His little brother was just unlucky. He was bitten by another child. It was dark, but he could see. It was before dawn, so he wasn't sure, but it was a boy with rough skin. His appearance was horrible. He was violent and breathing heavily. He attacked the boys who came out because of the strange noise, including his brother. Several boys got hurt because of him, and he ran away when they realized it. The boy shouted that this strange man was a ghoul, he was sure. But his younger brother was not a ghoul. Liz put the food in the boy's hands and said that this was enough. Here was his promised reward. She put a couple of coins in her other hand and said that this was a bonus from her. A servant like her would never need it. Therefore, the boy should live to the fullest. Liz added that if the great savior behind her could, then she was sure that the two of them also had a way to escape. Therefore, they should never give up. Shingo said he didn't think Liz could be so good with children. She said he was making fun of her. It was his job to be nice to children. Children were supposed to laugh or cry, not go through trash cans like servants. They stopped, and Liz said that according to the information, their opponent is in the third stage of a ghoul. It is quite dangerous. Shingo asked again what the third stage is. She said there were several stages to becoming a ghoul. The first stage was vomiting and strange changes in the body. The second stage was losing one's mind and attacking others. And the stinking body is the last, third stage. Suddenly she felt something and asked, finding someone who looked like a ghoul, what they should do. Shingo said, "Isn't it clear? They will follow him." Liz asked that even if it was dangerous and if he was going to do otherwise, it wouldn't be weird to leave the ghoul with her group. Shingo said no, he would go all the way. He needed a ghoul sample to make the serum, and how to get it didn't matter. Liz said she understood, then they should hit the road. Kuro said that was great. They ran towards the ghoul, who was 2 minutes away from them. Suddenly, a ghoul came out from around the corner in that direction. Granford said that they were done examining the people in the area, but how would they fight the ghoul? Liz replied that he should remember that his swords would not be effective against the level-3 ghoul. And if he did not cut him carefully, the infection could spread through the blood splatter. That was why a one-hit kill was so important in this operation. Liz continued. Besides, Nora will be aiming for the head with the bow. She said it was a bit difficult, Captain. Nora meant that it was extremely difficult to hit a moving object in the head. Nora added that even if she did hit it, there was no guarantee that the arrow would penetrate the skin. Suddenly, Granford asked what would happen if he delayed them. Liz replied that the chances of confusing an enemy with an ally were high, so no. Clace, who was standing nearby, came out and said that he was sorry, but if they could stop the ghouls for a little while, he could use the freeze, and then he would finish them off. Shingo said that was fine. Clace could use the ice elemental law, right? Grenford asked that as he had planned, it meant that he himself would be his dance partner. Shingo said no. She said that if they needed to stop them, he knew a great place to do it. Shingo was confident that they will need this barn in the operation. He said that if they forced him inside and destroyed the barn and its contents, then even a ghoul wouldn't be able to move. Right. Grenford said he wasn't sure they could get rid of him that easily. Clace said that it was clear that if he focused on the place where he could get out, it would be much easier. He liked it. Liz asked if it would work if they destroyed the barn in time. Shingo told her not to worry. He had a plan. Liz said okay, she would get him in herself. He thanked her. She suddenly turned to Nora and said she needed her to sort something out. Nora shouted back that, of course, she could help. She would do anything for Shingo. Nora would go from being a humble maid to being an escort to the bedroom if it was him. Shingo said that he didn't ask for anything like that. He wanted her to lend him her bow, and also for her to find a special cow with special innate properties. She was surprised that he was asking her to find a cow at such a time and in such a place, and even with a strange illness. Shingo replied that yes, because it was an important thing that would help find an antidote that would rid people of the ghoul disease. Nora shouted that it was accepted then. Shingo had a plan. He had to rely on her. Nora rushed to another part of Hydra to look for a special cow. Shingo thought, great. Now all that's left is to work on the shed. He began mixing ethyl, ethanol, and other organics. After a few minutes, Kure said the preparations were complete. She asked why Shingo had given Nora such a task. He replied that he would try to explain. There are some things that cannot be seen, such as germs and viruses. They facilitate their multiple cloning, thereby poisoning the body of their host and disabling it from the inside. But, on the other hand, a system is embedded in a person from birth that protects the body from them. In his world, it is called the immune system. In order to achieve a better immune system, he talked about its power, and the cow is very important here. Kurawe asked that he needs her power. Shingo answered that yes, she is one of the important parts. Kurawe got excited and shouted that she would do everything in the best possible way. A few minutes later, Liz shouted that the ghouls were already here. Quina ran from the ghouls and shouted to Grenford that she was leaving them to him. He shouted that yes, it was his turn to fight. He repelled one ghoul's attacks, when suddenly another one attacked him. Grenford said that this was a battle of the strongest. Liz decided to intervene and help Grenford. She defeated several ghouls, but suddenly realized that, as she thought, their skin was very strong. Liz continued to fight. Ranford managed to catch a moment of rest and asked Liz if it was a little more complicated than the normal armor. She replied that it didn't matter. They were here to exterminate the ghouls in one fell swoop, as well as lure and stop them. The ghouls didn't wait for them to talk and rushed to attack. Liz shouted that it was time to go back and lure the ghoul into the barn. She opened the barn door and smelled a strong odor. It was too scary, so Liz decided to escape through the window. Grenford shouted to Shingo that the ghoul was almost inside the barn, so he should shoot when Liz escaped. Shingo shouted that he understood. Liz jumped out of the window and he shot a fire arrow straight into the barn. The barn exploded with the ghoul inside due to the large amount of explosives. A piece of wood from the shed suddenly flew at Shingo, but Corral protected him by deflecting the flying threat. She asked if he was hurt anywhere. Shingo yelled that, no, he was grateful for her help. Suddenly, an evil ghoul body rose from the rubble and Liz threw a special sword at it. Seeing this, Kleiss said it was his turn. He summoned a shovel and ran towards the ghoul. He picked up the shovel and froze the ghoul with Liz's sword. He swung the shovel and destroyed the enemy. Shingo said that the explosion was much bigger than he expected. Kleiss said what kind of power was that Shingo was hiding? Maybe his power to control fire. Shingo said nothing like that. He just used some materials to create fire. Liz asked what Shingo was going to do about it now. He said he was going to dissect the ghoul and find the pathogen that was causing the disease. Liz said it was blood poisoning. Shingo couldn't track it down. He replied that he was going to study not blood, but biological tissues and fluids, for a better result. Liz said that if he asked anything, she would not understand his words. Shingo replied that they should forget about him. She had done her job well. Thank her for her help. Now it was his job to perform the autopsy. He must do everything to ensure that the ghoul's death was not in vain. He will fight the disease that has stood in his way. Kuroe asked if he could explain what an autopsy was. He said it was just like those griffins. He would cut up the ghoul's body, just like he had that griffin's body. Liz asked if he really had such a terrible taste. Kuro looked through the microscope and tried to catch the movement of the cells. Shingo said that there are red and white blood cells. They fill large spaces. Kuroe asked what those brown spots were. This blood was similar to the blood of infected people, right? Shingo replied that yes, they were treated with the solution. He said that they were probably the reason people became ghouls. Shingo suggested calling them just pathogens for now. Corral said that all the parasites she knew of were much bigger than these. She exclaimed that these were parasites too. Shingo began to explain to Kuro that there were two types of parasites, and these brown bodies were single-celled. She asked if they could really harm a person. They were very small. Shingo said that individually they were small. That was true. But when there were hundreds of thousands of them, they were quite capable of causing harm. Kuro said that it couldn't be. Could such a small thing turn people into ghouls? Shingo said that was exactly it. Shingo said that people get infected by ghouls or hydras through direct contact. The pathogen then enters their bodies through wounds and gradually moves to the brain over a period of weeks to a month. While the pathogen is in the brain, it does not cause harm and they have the opportunity to save the victim. Once the pathogen starts to replicate, it will attack the brain and at that point they can hardly do anything. Shingo said that this is indeed similar to the immune system that he talked about earlier. Liz interrupted Shingo's explanation and told him to stop talking in high-flown terms and take care of the ghouls. Shingo asked her to be patient for a while, as the knowledge would be needed to create a vaccine. He said that the immune system is like a guard in our body. So when an enemy, a pathogen, enters our body, the immune system cells recognize it and produce antibodies that defeat the enemy in numbers. These antibodies are much stronger than various viruses, but this immune system has a poor resemblance to rabies and the ghoul virus. And once the pathogens reach the central nervous system, they can reproduce as much as they want. He said that's why they can't do anything at this point. Kuro said that just by looking at their bodies, Shingo could understand so much. He's incredible. He said that he was worried that the ghouls smelled rotten, but they could still do the things they did before. Besides, there are many animals in the world that can smell rotten. They can try to eat the ghoul, but they can't and only carry the disease further. That's why the disease is very easily transmitted. Kure said that's how it is. He shouted that there was romance in the way every living being struggled according to the laws of nature. Liz didn't understand anything and asked when Shingo would start preparing the medicine. Shingo was speechless at her words. He said that he would finish the lecture first because they had learned enough about ghouls. It was time for them to start working on a better cure. Kuro exclaimed that he could really create a vaccine already. Shingo said yes and pointed at her, saying that everything needed was already here. She didn't understand what he meant and asked if it was really inside her. Shingo yelled that she had misunderstood him. He just wanted to create a being that could defeat the pathogen. Kuro sighed and said, "So that's what he meant." Shingo told her that from now on he needed help to save the infected children. She screamed happily, of course. Shingo turned to Liza and said that it was time for them to leave. She replied that she was tired of work and would stay here. Shingo said that there was nothing to be done then. They would go together. He and Kuro met Granford in the hallway, who asked if they were leaving already. Shingo replied that yes. He had asked Nora to find a special cow for him. Granford said she had already found it and was going to get another one, and something else. He asked if it wouldn't be better to shelter and isolate the residents in the slums right now. Or should he gather those who were attacked? Shingo said he was right. That would be great. But he had to be careful if he didn't want to get infected. Granford said he understood. Shingo added that he was asking him to find out the origin of the infected again. Besides, he does not believe that a Hydra that lives for several years is the cause of the disease. Granford replied that it is true that in their time it is difficult to obtain Hydra blood. He added that even if they manage to slip past their patrol, he finds it hard to imagine that this is the work of a necromancer or anyone else. Plus, they have another possibility that someone got inside the old Hydra nest and was in direct contact with Hydra or ghoul blood. Shingo said that Granford was right. Granford replied that he would then begin preparations and then consult with the captain. Kurao and Shingo went outside after talking with Granford. Nora, who saw them, shouted out words of greeting. Shingo thanked her for her hard work, and he hoped that the cow would be as useful as he expected. He asked Nora if she could take him to the cow. She said yes, she could. Suddenly, Nora started apologizing for her inappropriate appearance. She had been running all day and hadn't noticed it. Shingo said that then he should apologize for asking her for so much. Then she should take his handkerchief to wipe away the sweat if she doesn't mind. Nora shouted that it was wrong to wipe away a commoner's sweat with such expensive clothes. Shingo said that it was the least he could do, so she shouldn't worry. He looked behind Nora and said that Quina was behind her, right? Shingo was glad to meet her. Quina abruptly hid behind Nora. She replied that Quina was very embarrassed, so she should be forgotten. She changed the subject and said that she would then take Shingo to the cow she had tied up behind the lake. Shingo thought it would take a long time before she stopped being so familiar with him. Nora brought them to the cow, and Shingo said that one eye was inflamed, but the other had leukemia. She did a good job. With this, they will finally create a vaccine. Kurue approached him and asked what they would do with all those cows then. Shingo replied that they would exchange the lives of those cows for the lives of the slum dwellers. She said that he was going to sacrifice their lives. Shingo replied that he was a magician to perform a miracle, and she knew it. If he could save many more lives this way, then he shouldn't hesitate to do it. He was always preparing for this. Kurao said she figured out what to do. Shingo said he was going to create something to clone that cow with leukemia. He was going to use it for treatment. First, they will inject the ghoul's body fluid into a cow that does not have leukemia. This will then create antibodies that can fight the ghoul's pathogen. Then, they will find the cow's spleen and use Kuro's powers to create antibodies that can fight the virus. He added that they would then combine these antibodies with broken cells from one cow, which would then give them endless cells that would multiply and work against the disease. Shingo said that all they had to do then was leave them in a petri dish, and there would be as many of them as they all wanted. They only had to do it once. Kuroe asked how they would combine the two bodies in one place. He said that by combining such small things, they would get something that was effective in his old world. Shingo said that he would even ask Quina to come. Then, if the two of them joined forces, he thought that they could really save the lives of many people. Shingo said that they could begin then. What they were going to create now were antibodies that could cure humans of the ghoul pathogen. It was all quite simple. They first bathed the existing bodies in weak electricity using Quina's power. Then, after the membrane is split, the two cells will merge. Then, they will take several merged bodies and increase their number using Kure's power. This way, they will create perfect antibodies against the ghoul disease. After all, having magical powers, they will be able to create them much faster than in his past world. Shingo said that people's lives depended on this vaccine, so he was counting on them. Nora shouted that she would help too. Karao said that they would do their best. A few days later, Shingo injected the vaccine into one of the infected and told him to come out of the barricaded area. The townspeople exclaimed why they were letting people out. One of them said that it couldn't be. If this person was infected, the entire blocked part would be burned. It doesn't matter how. They would all die there. But he doesn't see smoke. That's weird. The man in front of the gate was screaming to be let out because he saw a dark-haired knight grab a guy and say he needed to be released. And he would be released if he passed the test. The boys said that he had not returned because he'd been released. The other people said that this was not true because if he had been released, they would have been released too. Shingo asked Granford what was going on. Granford said that the people from the slums were rebelling. Someone had spread a rumor about a boy who had been released a few days ago. Shingo replied, okay, then they will check them too. He means that uninfected people will be released. Granford asked if everything will be okay. Shingo said that the vaccine had worked, and if they were found to be infected, they would prevent it and cure them. Everything would be fine. Granford shouted that yes, he understood. He turned to the people and told them to all listen to him. Shingo told them to return to the estate. They had much work to do. Word of Shingo and Liz's work spread quickly. The townspeople, upon seeing Shingo, said that this was the knight who could cure a ghoul's illness. Something about healing from a blocked place and disbanding them. One man said it could be, since he was being followed by a child of the griffin. Another woman said there was also a rumor that he had defeated a ghoul by himself. Shingo thought they had done something wrong. Liz said that every night was thought of that way. Moreover, they were walking in a crowd through the slums. It must be suspicious. Kuroe screamed in shock that this couldn't be happening. She grabbed Liz and started saying that Shingo wasn't suspicious at all. He was healing and helping people. Liz whispered softly that she shouldn't have said that. They approached the guard who greeted Shingo. He thanked the guard for his work. But the guard said that he had a message for Shingo from the captain. He received the report on the requested case and told to wait in the barracks reading room. Shingo said that he understood and made a proposal to go to Kuroe and Liz. He said that maybe Granford had found out something about the source of the infection. They went into the reading room and saw a huge amount of documents. Shingo asked him if he had found anything. Granford said he had. The idea of microorganisms was completely unexpected. But if you put the pieces together, you might find something. First, the ghoul they found was named Joseph, and he seemed to be from the slums. He was homeless, but suddenly his money situation changed and he was hanging around bars. It seems that Joseph made money by selling old swords. Granford pulled out one of the swords and said it was Joseph's merchandise. Liz said Quinn had the old sword. He said if they searched around, they might find the dig site. The same sword was found in a cave where the Hydra lived. They believe it originally belonged to a man who was destroyed by it. It seems that Joseph had business with a merchant who sold similar goods. Granford continued that, according to other documents, the ghoul outbreak has been occurring on the southern side of the slum for the past few years. Furthermore, the infection has only spread to merchants and slum dwellers. Shingo said that it turns out that all roads lead to the Hydra's cave. That's where the people of the slums got the treasures. And if Granford thinks that the merchants bought the treasures from the infected, then it all fits. Clay said Shingo was very insightful, and the evidence was in this bag he was holding. It was a record of the construction of an underground water supply, but the plan was rejected and everything remained as is. He added that this happened because they came across a strange cavity on the way, and if you take the position of the cavity and put it on a map with the location of the Hydra cave, then they can hypothesize that the depression is connected to an ancient Hydra cave. Shingo said that the source of the infection is most likely in the Hydra cave. Kuroe asked that as far as she knew, the Hydra had died centuries ago, burning in its cave. Could it have given birth to ghouls? Liz replied that from their point of view, it was more likely than a human spreading Hydra blood, or finding a necromancer. Grenford added that since they had been guarding this fortress daily, it was more likely that it was originally a Hydra, something that someone had gotten past them. Kuroe said if what they were trying to say was true, she was wrong. Shingo said the problem was how the pathogen survived there. There were two options. The first was simple. Perhaps the pathogen was still alive. The second option was that the animals inside the cave had become ghouls, and the environment suited them. Liz smiled and said that there was another option. It was possible that the Hydra was still alive. Kuro smiled widely at this information. Shingo immediately understood what she was talking about and replied that she needed to remember he was an ordinary person. Kuroe shouted that she knew, but that was for now, wasn't it? He said that a talentless person like him couldn't handle the Hydra. Moreover, it was most likely already pacified and dead. Shingo said to get everyone ready, they would have to go to the cave. Grenford said he understood. Liz said there was no doubt that the depression was connected to the cave. The entire group set off through the underground tunnels, their faces protected by masks. Shingo shouted that everyone was ready. Great. Karawe asked him what kind of strange clothes he was wearing. Liz looked at his clothes and said that the pants and jacket were connected. What a strange outfit. Shingo shouted that Tsunagi is the strongest equipment filled with love. She is a godsend for a man like him. Granford said he should put it aside. He had just bought some suits and there would be one for Shingo. Liz took one of the bags and asked Shingo what it was for. He said it was lime. Liz asked him why he had brought such a heavy thing with him. Shingo said they would go ahead and disinfect everything with it. Liz asked what he was going to give all the animals to drink. Shingo said it was a disinfectant, not a detoxifier. You don't have to drink it, they'll just put lime on top. He said that if the ghoul pathogen was present in the bodies and waste in the cave, it would continue to infect humans if it was not eliminated. Right? Kuro shouted that she understood the essence of disinfection. Liz said she doesn't understand complicated things, but that means there won't be any danger in the cave. The advance party, Grenford and Kleiss, will be in front, followed by Shingo and Kure. She will be bringing up the rear. This is the order they will move during disinfection. She added that in case of danger, Shingo moves back. Granford said that this path seems to be connected to the Hydra's cave. He said it looked like Joseph had used wooden blocks to cover the blocks. Maybe that's why the others haven't found anything yet, so they should move on. Ahead of the main group was an advance group consisting of Roar and Nora. Shingo asked what it was like to be in the advance group. Did they notice anything unusual? Nora said it was nothing important. Shingo was glad there was no Hydra here. He turned to the advance team and said he had taken the antibodies just in case, so they should let him know if anything happened. Rai and Nora said that their abilities were much higher than humans. Shingo thought he understood. It was like an online game. He gave all the team members roles, and Kuro was given the role of a battle priestess. He shouldn't judge her by her appearance. She's very dangerous. Nora shouted that they needed to go down even deeper. Shingo looked down and said that it was deep and scary. He was sure that he would die. There were at least 10 meters down there. Rai said they would go first and help with the rope. Shingo went down last. He asked Liz if there were any monsters. She said maybe slimes, bats, and skeletons. They are very weak. Even the townspeople can handle them. No need to worry. Shingo asked her what she thought Joseph had been infected with and turned into a ghoul. She said she didn't know. Suddenly, a slime appeared on their way. Suddenly, Shingo realized one thing. If you don't get attacked by a monster, say a slime eating the remains of a bat, a ghoul, then if someone got hit in the face with a stream of their slime, they would also become infected. Granford said that sounded plausible, despite their insignificance in comparison. He destroyed a slime at long range with one blow. Shingo said that after it was destroyed, he would treat the slime with lime. Then they all went down to the deepest part, reaching a dead end. Liz said that the noise and smell stopped here. Shingo said he was sure the sword Joseph took was something you find all over the caves. Kleiss said he didn't see any swords here. Rory suggested that Joseph might have gotten the sword from somewhere else. Liz said the only way in was through a cancelled underground water main. Hypothetically, even if there was another outlet to the surface, the land around it would have to be destroyed. Granford said they hadn't heard anything like that. Shingo said they should put the sword matter aside for later then. Disinfection should be enough as a ghoul countermeasure. He began to sprinkle slaked lime around him. Karawi shouted that she would do the dirty work. She could handle it if there was anything that needed to be sprinkled. Shingo shouted that she was sprinkling too much. Suddenly, Shingo noticed that the smoke from the lime was decreasing at one place on the wall. He moved the stones and said that wasn't the wind blowing from there. Liz struck that place with her sword. She said it was hidden behind the rocks. Shingo poured lime because he knew it. He shouted that no, he didn't know it. Liz smiled and said that was her turn. She cast a spell, and the wall disintegrated into small pieces. Shingo exclaimed that this could be a hiding place, but where hidden gold and silver treasures are waiting for him. Liz said no. Suddenly, the two of them saw a huge dragon without wings. Shingo thought it was a snake. Liz said it was a Hydra that lived in a cave. She added that it was definitely alive because it didn't emit any smells. However, it didn't attack them for some reason. Maybe it was barely alive, so it didn't notice them. Kurue asked how the Hydra could survive for thousands of years without food. Shingo said that it could happen. Animals have a feature called autophagy, where they digest themselves and take in minimal food. This helps her conserve energy and continue to fast. This body is huge, so it definitely has reserves. Perhaps it caught the robbers and feeds on them from time to time. Nora asked why Han left the cave for over 100 years. It was obvious that there was more food outside. Shingo said that it had to do with the story of Doni's ancestor pouring oil into the cave and setting it on fire. Granford asked what he meant. Shingo replied that he had never heard of a Hydra successfully resisting fire. This one clearly had no choice but to crawl further into the cave to escape the oil. Kotaro asked Shingo what they should do then. He said that it was the cause of the ghoulification. It was weakened, so he wanted to deal with it. It only sprays water and poison if you get close to it, right? Koro said she hadn't seen it herself, but that's what they were told. Shingo thought that if there was a boss in the game, it would have to be fought in an interesting way. But there was an easy way to defeat it, like a trap. Suddenly, a drop of water fell from a stalactite, and Shingo suggested that they could blow up the cave along with the Hydra. Everyone stared at him blankly. Shingo said, how about blowing up the Hydra? They're inside a cave, so he thinks it'll be easier to bury it alive with rocks than try to defeat it by attacking it head-on. He asked Kura what he thought about it. She asked him incredulously what he meant. Grenford said that now that Shingo had mentioned it, would their commander be able to cause a collapse? Liz said that it was easy in words, but there were some difficulties with the long distance and the huge cave. So she needed an amplifier for it. Shingo asked that she couldn't do it. She said that, okay, since he told her to do it, she would do it. Liz told Granford to bring the cloth. She made a small cut on her hand. Shingo screamed, what was she doing? Liz said that he hadn't told her to do it, hadn't he? He screamed that he just wanted to see if she could do it. Liz said it was possible. As he could see, she was performing a huge bloody service for him. It was a bloody service. She said that should be enough. Liz asked Kuro to heal her. She looked at Shingo and said it was his turn. He had to shoot the cloth into the ceiling above the Hydra. Shingo said he didn't understand anything at all. First, he wanted her to explain herself. Liz replied that if she needed to activate a long-range, large-scale attack, she said that, with blood, you can compensate for the lack of strength, in some moments, so it requires a little blood. Shingo said that he should have been warned before doing this. Otherwise, he was a little shocked by it. Liz said that he himself ordered her to do it. Shingo shouted that she knew that he himself did not fully understand this world. She said that next time he would be more careful, and now he had to shoot. Shingo took the arrow and fired it straight into the cave ceiling. He shouted to Liz that everything was really going to be okay. She said not to worry. Everything was going according to plan. Well, almost. Nora said it was still safe. He had to trust them. Their senses were honed to detect sounds and movements. She added that there was no sign of the ceiling collapsing. Liz said Shingo heard her. Now what will he do next? Try to open the Hydra. Shingo replied that their opponent was a legendary dragon. Right. He said that they shouldn't get carried away and leave everything as it is, buried like this. Even if the Hydra managed to survive, Shingo is sure that it will soon come to an end. Shingo said that they could now explore all the exits on the right side. If there were any, everything would be fine after they checked them. Granford said that was fine. Then they would handle the rest of the Hydra. Liz held out her hand and motioned for Shingo to stay put. She said that their noise had attracted intruders. He couldn't believe his eyes, and said that they were skeletons. Liz said yes, and there were quite a few of them. It was hard to count. Corral said he wasn't worried. Shingo said there were a lot of them. Maybe they should go back. She said no. It was better to take them on. It would be worse if they all turned away. Then the skeletons would just throw their weapons at them. They weren't very strong if you fought them head-on. Shingo shouted that there were more of them. They definitely wanted to fight. Liz said that there wouldn't be any problems with that many, and it would be easier to defend if Shingo stayed behind. He said that he would then move away. Suddenly, a beam of unknown smoke began to shine through the water. Shingo shouted for everyone to hide from him. Only Nora could not hide, and was engulfed in the unknown smoke. Nora's place was gone. Shingo asked what it was. Kuro replied that it wasn't breath. She thought it was poison-type magic. If it was used by a human, it wouldn't be as powerful, but the dragon's is strengthened. Grenford said that the Hydra had so much power left even after taking so much damage. Liz got up from the ground and told everyone to stand up. Granford and Roar should destroy the skeletons. Kuro and Clace take Shingo and leave, and she will attract the attention of the Hydra and try to help them with her power. Shingo asked what that meant. Granford and Roar shouted that they did. He took Liz's hand and told her what she thought would happen if the Hydra fired another poison shot like that. She said they could do it, and if they couldn't, they would all die. Shingo said he knew that if they all ran, the skeletons might attack them from behind, but they would be finished if the Hydra fired again. Kuroe took Shingo's hand and told him to hurry. He shouted that even if they blocked it with rocks and ice shields, the shockwave would still remain. And if it was aimed at unprotected humans who were fighting skeletons, he broke free from Kuro's grip and shouted at her that how could someone be called a saint if he ran away, while his subordinates were left to die? Liz said that if he didn't like her way, maybe he had another idea, and if it was an order, she had no right to refuse. She wouldn't interfere, but he had to understand that the question of whether they would survive would be decided by his order. Shingo said he knew. He had enough casualties. They would return home with all the remaining members of the group. If that didn't happen, what was the point of him living? Liz asked him what his plan was then. She said she hoped he didn't stop her just because he thought he could handle the Hydra alone. Liz added that he really was a unique person, but he's never tamed a dragon or fought one, has he? Usually when faced with a monster like a dragon, the best thing to do is run. Shingo said she was right. He wasn't like the others. He'd never fought, and he wasn't fit to fight. Kure yelled that it didn't change the fact that he was very important to them. Shingo said that they wanted to have knowledge of another world that was more advanced. Maybe they could defeat her if they combined Kuro and Liz's 2 spells. He said he needed to get closer, so the Hydra wouldn't notice him. Kuro yelled that the closer he got, the harder it would be to dodge her attack. Shingo said yes. He would most likely die if he was hit directly by the Hydra, even as a unique individual. He doesn't think he can withstand its power. Liz said that if he understood that, he could just use them as pawns. Kuroe, with tears in her eyes, said that it was very dangerous. Shingo replied that the chances of success would be even higher. And besides, he had a plan. Shingo told Kuro to put some of her blood on a bunch of arrows, and when he gave her the signal, she was to use her wood magic. She replied that a normal arrow wouldn't work against dragon scales. Shingo shouted that if she fired like usual, it might be possible, but they didn't have time to discuss it now. She just had to trust him and prepare her magic. Liz held out her hand and said that he should take her blood too. It would be better to use as much blood as possible. Clace held out his hand and said that he would give some of his own too, because if they died, he wouldn't be able to face Julius. He told Shingo to have good luck. Rory and Granford shouted that they couldn't use magic, but their souls were with them. They would leave this mission to Shingo. Kuroe said that she understood. If Shingo said so, then she would help him, no matter what it cost her. He said that he would definitely do it. Shingo ran straight at the Hydra. Clyce yelled that Shingo shouldn't worry about the skeletons, and that he should leave them to the others. Shingo yelled for Liz to clear the skeletons for him. Shingo dashed 50 meters and found himself right in front of the Hydra's face. It opened its mouth to eat Shingo, but he dodged it and grabbed onto its body. He yelled for Liz to create a support for him. Shingo stood on the rocks and pulled the bowstring. The Hydra opened its mouth and tried to eat him again. He waited for the right moment and shot it right into its mouth. Kurue yelled at Shingo to run away from there quickly. He yelled at her not to worry about him and to use magic. He grabbed the Hydra's body with his knife. She used her spell and a huge tree grew out of the Hydra, which destroyed the monster. Shingo was hanging on the Hydra's corpse and thinking that it looked like the Hydra had indeed died this time. Kara ran to him and used a chain to lower him to the ground. She started asking if he was hurt. Shingo yelled that he was fine. He was more worried about Granford and the others. He replied that they had cleared the area. Liz said he didn't have to worry. After the Hydra died, monsters like skeletons were nothing to them. Shingo said he was wondering if he was useful in this matter. Kuroe shouted, of course. After all, only he could deal with the magic of the Hydra. Only such a unique person as he could cope with it. As the legends said, Shingo said that even if there were only 6 of them left, they were able to survive. Liz asked in surprise that he was really injured. He looked around and said that he didn't seem to be. Granford said he had blood on his forehead. Shingo said he had just wiped his forehead. There might have been blood on his glove already. Liz said neither of them had any injuries. She concluded that it was Hydra blood. Kuro turned pale and whispered that it couldn't be. Shingo sighed and said that it was clear to him. After all, if you were to come into contact with ghoul blood, you could become one yourself. He added that it was possible that it had gotten on his gloves when he had punched the Hydra in the eye. Pathogens use enzymes to slowly eat away at the skin and get inside. Nothing should happen if he washed it off thoroughly. But he should still be quarantined for a while. Liz said that the Hydra's blood is poison. Shingo asked what kind of poison it was. She said that it was poisonous. If you drink even a drop, you will die on the same day. If the blood gets on your skin, you will die in a few days. The only way you can survive is if the blood is not pure when it gets on you. Shingo said with tension, "This is..." She added that, even so, he would end up as a ghoul. Shingo said that he had finally received divine punishment. Kure screamed that they had to leave here quickly. In Donnie's castle. Medical room. The doctor asked Shingo if it was true that he had been ingested by the Hydra's blood. He replied that, given the situation, he believed that it was. The doctor said that usually when the Hydra's blood comes into contact with human skin, the poison's effects begin to manifest themselves within 10 to 30 minutes. At this time, the person will experience pain and chills, and later convulsions will begin. Paralysis will occur and other symptoms may occur, which would lead to death. But several hours had passed since Shingo's return. What was really going on here? Shingo replied that he himself did not know. Perhaps the poisons of this world cannot affect him, because he is from another world. The doctor said that it is possible Shingo is a unique person, but there is a possibility that he could become a ghoul. Shingo agreed with him. He replied that if there were problems, he could prove the effectiveness of his treatment against turning into a ghoul. So he'll be quarantined for a while, and then they'll see what happens. Shingo left the office and closed the door. He turned to the girls who were waiting for him and said that first of all, they should visit the grave. Shingo stood in front of the grave and said that this was all they could bring back. They were able to protect only this. But they had human form for only a few days. Kuro asked Liz if Shingo was crying. She said she didn't know. Maybe he was, though, because his world wasn't as cruel as theirs. That's what makes him who he is. Kuroe said that was why he could become their holiness. Liz sighed and said that it was the other way around. He couldn't do it. Kuroe yelled out why. She thought Shingo could save a lot of people. Liz said that if it was just about saving, but the previous saints didn't become legends by simply spreading strange knowledge, right? With such gentleness, Shingo won't be able to make a choice between life and death like his predecessors. She added that no one can be a hero alone, and there is nothing wrong with putting some of the burden on someone else. But it will be too difficult for him. Kuro asked what she meant by it being better to force her ideals on Shingo. Liz said not really. She was just saying that to her. He looked like a normal person. If Kuroe thinks she has to do something, then she has to do it. After all, isn't that what her religion says? Kuroe said that Liz was trying to give her advice. She replied that she was not smart enough to give advice to anyone. Kuroe should understand her words as she wanted. Kuroe smiled, thanking Liz for her words. Shingo stood up from the ground and said that it was not good for a girl to get wet from the rain. He apologized for the wait. It was time for them to go back. He was going to quarantine immediately. Liz asked Shingo with a smile on her face. What was he crying just now? Wasn't he? He replied that even if he was, she shouldn't point it out. She said that they were all going to die. Didn't he realize that when he was looking at that pile of ashes? Kuroe screamed that Shingo wasn't soft. He was just kind. He said that it was like a way to just end it. After all, they have memories of gratitude to someone close to them, don't they? And in happy times and sad times, and maybe in sad times too. As soon as they remember them, that's when they start smiling. It's his way of showing that he's going to move on without putting himself through unnecessary stress. Liz said he had his own way of thinking. It's amazing. Shingo shouted that then she was actually thinking about someone twice her age. Liz replied that someone who is ignorant of the world, naive, someone who can't fight. Is there more? Or did she miss something? Shingo yelled that she was trying too hard to look smart. Kuroe said that Shingo was trying to move forward. That was the side of him she respected. Shingo laughed and said that she embarrassed him with that. But the incident with Nora made him rethink the hardships of life. He wants to help those around him and do everything he can. To do this, they need to raise funds, then improve medicine and agriculture. And once everything is done, they will aim. Shingo is looking for something, but it is ahead, and he wants to find it. So he asks Liz and Kuro to keep an eye on him. Kuro said sure, and Liz said if that is what her master wants, she will obey. Shingo said that now it was time to return to Donnie's castle. He needed a quarantine room. He sat in the center of the room and petted Guri. Suddenly, Shingo put him down and said that now was not the time to be idle. In order to move forward, he needs to use this time wisely. Suddenly, Granford burst into the room and asked if Shingo could help the captain. Shingo was surprised and asked what happened. But when he saw Liz's wounds, he exclaimed where she got them from. Shingo yelled what happened to Liz. He wanted to touch her, but remembered that he could have infected her with the ghoul virus. Granford laid Liz on the bed and said that she took the blow from the Lord after taking full responsibility. Shingo said that she was hit by Donnie. But they were able to defeat the Hydra. How could that be? Or is it because they lost Nora? Granford said that servants have no value to the Lord. Shingo realized that it was because of him that Liz got hit. Because the Hydra's poison could harm him and turn him into a ghoul. He asked what he should do. They should say that, and then he would try to talk to Donnie. Granford replied that there was no need for that. Couldn't Shingo just hide Liz? He replied that he was still under quarantine, so living together wasn't the best solution. Granford said that this is the only safe place for her. If she leaves this room, the Lord will execute her on the spot. So he must help her. He will let her stay. Shingo replied that he understood. Granford thanked him and said that he should go, because he might be suspected. If Shingo needed anything, he could ask the guard. He was a servant knight too. Liz asked him what she should do. Shingo said that he was in the same situation as her. But in any case, they had to sit in this room for another 10 days under quarantine. She replied that if he said so, then that was what she should do. If Shingo needed anything, he could just call her for help. Shingo tried to stop her from leaving, but he realized that she was already taken care of and there was no need to worry. He went to the door and asked that there should be someone here. Right? Could he ask him for a favor? Suddenly, a childish voice shouted at him that there was no one here who would listen to him. Shingo said that this voice, it's Koina. Can he ask her for a favor? She screamed that she didn't want to listen to him because he was just pretending to be nice. She hated this type of person. Rai walked up to her and lightly hit her on the head. He said that it was their duty to protect their master even at the cost of their own lives, so no one was to blame for this. And now she must apologize for her words and not betray the kindness of their master. Quina whispered that this was not kindness. After all, why did everyone come back alive? But Nora did not. She screamed that then why didn't he help Nora? Shingo replied that it was true. She was right. He wasn't good enough and had no right to ask for forgiveness. Quina screamed that it was true. It was his fault. He was worthless. She threw a stone at him and ran away. Rory came to the door and asked for forgiveness for Quina's actions. Shingo said it was okay, because Nora was her best friend. So it was obvious that someone would hate him for this. Rory said it was wrong. Nora's death wasn't Shingo's fault. At that moment, everyone's chances of survival were about the same, but Nora couldn't react in time, even though there were no prerequisites for that. Everything was fair. Shingo said that even now, Rory interrupted him and said that even now they are in this position, and he is in another. Rory understands that even with her death, Shingo is doing everything he can. That is enough. He added that Quina was probably somewhere nearby trying to calm down by eavesdropping on their conversation. Shingo was worrying too much about everything. He asked if worrying about something wasn't normal. Ray replied that of course not. It was enough that he was already taking care of them, the servants. If only there was someone who could take full responsibility for their lives. A few hours ago, Liz and Granford came to Donnie to give a report. He told her to hurry up and report already. She said that, as Shingo suspected, ghouls began to appear from behind the Hydra. It seems that she was hiding underground. After all, in the deepest part of the cave, many skeletons and Hydra were found. After Shingo fought her, she was defeated. Donnie shouted that it was impossible. Liz added that Shingo had only lost one servant knight from his entourage. He shouted that it didn't matter. Liz said that they already had orders on how to deal with the ghoulish, and she was told that it should be fine if the underground part was completely cut off. Donnie shouted that it was very good news. He told her not to say such nice things with such a face. It made him feel uneasy. Donnie said that he would not even mind praising Liz. He smiled and said that everything was going according to plan. She had to do everything Shingo said, and they had to take the Hydra outside and burn it in front of the people. They should report this as Donnie's achievement in a way that even a fool would understand. Liz said fine. She had something else she could report. Liz said that Shingo was exposed to Hydra blood. He received a deadly poison in the form of Hydra blood and was checked by a doctor. There are currently no abnormalities in his health. Suddenly, Donnie ran up to her and shouted what they were doing there. He hit Liz on the head with a bottle and asked what her orders were. She replied that she was to escort Shingo. Donnie shouted that it was to accompany, but then why did she protect herself? A servant. He ordered her not to let Shingo get a single wound, no matter how many people died. He hit Liz a couple of times and said that she couldn't even fulfill the only duty assigned to her. After all, after so much effort to summon him, he would only have time to achieve victory over the ghouls. Liz said she had nothing more to report. Her report was over. Donnie got mad and said she was worthless to him then. Granford yelled at him to wait. Shingo said something to her. Donnie said he didn't care because Shingo was going to die soon anyway. He said no. Even after the Hydra's blood got on Shingo, it didn't seem to affect his body. Donnie asked what happened next. Granford replied that it was all Shingo's words. After all, he's the one who came up with a way to combat ghoulification. Maybe he knows how to deal with his own problem. Donnie ordered Liz to be taken away from here. Besides, if Shingo dies, they'll both lose their heads. He added that he didn't need useless servants, and they should start burning the Hydra tomorrow and try to get more knowledge from Shingo, just in case. Granford said that he understood everything. They leave. Liz told him not to lie. Shingo didn't tell her anything, and he certainly doesn't have a special body. He asked worriedly why she'd reported this to Donnie. It was the same as asking him to destroy her. She replied that she had simply spoken out as ordered and nothing more. Granford said that people are not dolls and are not needed only to perform someone else's duties. Liz replied that it was not for him to say that. He was below her in rank. He replied that even in such a situation, he does not have the habit of calling girls trash, if she characterizes him with her. Liz smiled and asked that he has not changed. Right. Granford replied that she had changed, but her unreal power was still with her. But it seemed she had made a mistake somewhere, and it seemed she was having a little difficulty in fulfilling her duty. Liz sat at the very top of the tower, and said that if Granford was talking about her like that, it meant that he had really been watching her very closely. Shingo realized that it was late, but Liz had not returned yet. He went upstairs and asked if she was cold. Shingo added that the food had been served for a long time. Was she not hungry yet? She asked if this was an order to have dinner with him. Shingo said no. Why would he give such an order? Liz said no. She was not hungry. He turned his head to the sky and said that the sky was beautiful. There were so many stars that it was impossible to count them. In his world, such views were rare. Because of the pollution in the sky, you can't see most of the stars. Liz said that he had a very beautiful world. He asked what was beautiful about it. She smiled and said that it turned out that there were things that he didn't know either. The fewer stars, the fewer deaths. After all, a world where you don't become a star after you die is a truly good place. So she thinks that his world is beautiful. He said that he did, but he wanted to save as many lives in this world as possible. Liz said that this was coming from a man who didn't even know how to hold a sword properly. Shingo replied that he was confident in his goal. He would do it. After all, Shingo had already suffered a great loss, so he could do it. But anyway, it was cold up there. He would go down first, but she could come down too if she wanted. He fell asleep at the table. After a while, he woke up and said he dozed off. Plus, it was getting cooler in here. Shingo looked away and saw that Liz hadn't come down. He went upstairs and saw that Liz was unconscious. Shingo felt her and determined that she had mild to moderate hypothermia. She needed to be warmed up immediately. Shingo felt that she had become warmer, and besides, he had completely forgotten that he was forbidden to let her out. He went downstairs and put Liz in the bed to warm her up. Shingo immediately tried to light a fire with flint and steel, but it took him 10 minutes to do so. He walked over to Liz's bed and thought, "She looks much better now. Everything should be fine now." Liz woke up and saw Shingo sleeping next to her. She asked that he really needed her, even though she was a servant. Liz hit him on the head a couple of times and told him to wake up. Shingo was surprised that she woke up and said that he had taken care of her responsibly. And besides, she said that if she wanted to, she would come down. So why didn't she do it? She replied that if he was asking her, she had no idea why this had happened. Shingo asked if she was laughing at him. Liz replied that she wasn't laughing, she was being completely serious. Besides, she wanted to ask him a question too. Why was he here? Why in this world? Shingo said it just happened that way. There was nothing he could do about it. Liz said she would change the question then. Why Shingo lives? He said he had no reason to think about it. Shingo asked why she asked such questions. She said that this answer was different from hers. He said that he did not understand her. Liz thinks that he lives because he has something. He is needed. He has many people to meet. Isn't that why he keeps living? Shingo replied that isn't everyone the same in that regard? Liz said she was the same. That's why she asked. Didn't he from Granford that she was supposed to be destroyed because he was contaminated with the Hydra's blood, so it'd be better for her to die in the cold? Shingo replied that she shouldn't say that so easily. She asked Shingo to explain it to her then. He replied that as someone older than her, he could explain one thing. Liz covered his mouth with her hand and replied that it didn't matter. Shingo said that she was the one who asked him to tell her. Liz replied that she simply realized that it was useless for her to listen. She was a stupid servant and her head was starting to hurt. Liz got up from her bed and said that she should be grateful to him for saving her. Shingo replied that he didn't care whether she lived or not. She said that even someone as stupid as her could see that he had tried very hard to save her life. And besides, she wouldn't be able to die or sleep if he kept holding her like that. Shingo replied that he did it to feel her temperature. She teased him a little and said that in the end, she was just an obedient servant, like a dog. He replied that she was a half-human. Liz told him to order whatever he wanted. She would do it. Shingo shouted that she would stay with him and protect him properly. Shingo would buy her and become her master. Then she would continue to do what he told her to do. Liz was surprised that she had to do the same thing. How boring Shingo was. She said she agreed, but he said that was not all. From now on, she had to bark at every suggestion. Here was something interesting for her, just like she had asked for. He added that Liz had promised him that she would help when they were at Nora's grave. Liz said that she hadn't promised anything. She had simply said that she would do as he ordered, and that was it. Shingo smiled and said that it didn't matter. It would be as he wished from now on. Liz listened to Shingo and did as he told her. From now on, he was her unofficial master. She acknowledged it. Besides, if he bought it as he promised, he would become its true owner. Shingo shouted that he would definitely buy it. The young man fell asleep at his desk. He folded his arms on it and rested his forehead on them, still holding the book in front of him. There were other documents on the table to the side, and a bright lamp was shining above, illuminating everything with light. Behind him, the pitch darkness was also illuminated by one of the lamps with a candle burning inside. It was attached to the wall near the bookshelves, inside of which were many documents or books. A young girl entered the room, holding a small lamp in her hand, with a small candle burning inside. The girl had long white hair tied in a braid to the side. She looked for the man with her eyes. She turned to the side, calling Kazami, herself. Finally finding him, she extended her hand to him and called out to the young man who continued to sleep, his face buried in the table. As soon as he turned around, it was immediately obvious that he looked little like a human. His eye sockets were empty and black, and inside them were small dots resembling fireflies. His face was all cracked and badly disfigured. He growled like a beast. The girl screamed in fear, pressing her palms to her mouth. What she saw scared her very much. Instantly waking up, she stood up, shaking all over. Even after waking up, her face looked very scared. The girl quickly ran to the man, starting to knock on his door and calling Kazami, herself. The man, covered with a blanket, was sleeping, leaning against the door, which the girl was knocking on. He moaned from the noise, and then, coming to his senses a little, wished the girl good morning. Rubbing his still sleepy eyes with his fist to remove the remnants of sleep, he asked Kuro if she really couldn't sleep. The girl said that it was so. She couldn't sleep knowing that he was not around, so she got permission to visit him. Now she can rest easy. Saying this, a smile lit up her face. It became clear to the young man. He understands that it can be difficult, but he asked her to be strong and not to forget to eat properly. She does not have to worry about him. He will definitely be fine being here. The girl kept repeating that she just needed to wait a little longer, a little longer, a little longer, and then everything would be fine. She kept repeating this phrase like a madwoman. She just had to wait 5 more days, and she would be able to see Kazami herself, in good health. Outside, a huge copper bell rang in one of the towers. The girl, standing next to the huge altar, on the huge stage, spread knowledge of gullification in the church every day. She responded kindly to people's concerns. As soon as parishioners approached her, along with residents, she, smiling, shook their hands, calming everyone down. If they had doubts, she would open up to them and convince them of the truth of her words. She was always kind to them and was ready to listen in any situation. The reason for the ghouls was the Hydra, but the Hydra was killed by Kazami's group to prevent the infection from spreading, so there is nothing to worry about. But if they still have symptoms of gullification, they will cure them and allow them to be infected again. The girl was in so much pain, but she is sure that Kazami is in even more pain right now. And so all 10 days in isolation passed. The girl continued to walk in different directions near the prison door. The guard standing nearby looked at her strangely. Probably he was tired of her restlessness. She approached the knight, apologizing and saying shouldn't His Holiness have been released from the isolation cell by now? And anyway, when will the signal come in? The guard had been listening to these words since dawn. He asked the girl to calm down. But the girl said that wasn't His Holiness fine this morning. They should have released him already, so he should give the order for his release. The guy already asked her to calm down and not to say such unreasonable things. The sounds of the bell echoed, and the girl shuddered, calming down. The guard standing next to her had already put his palms forward, blocking her way. The girl took this ringing as a signal and, folding her hands in front of her in prayer, closed her eyes and bowed her head. Instead of standing still, she turned around screaming and kicked the door. The door was completely knocked down and fell with a loud sound on the floor. The guard was in a panic. He asked what she would do if His Holiness was behind that door. But she assured the girl that this would not happen. She was sure of it. She screamed, calling Kazami, running ahead herself, running into the room and continuing to call Kazami. She saw 2 people in front of her. She stopped in shock, looking at what was happening. Right in front of her, a man in a uniform with a huge tail and ears on his head, reminiscent of a cat, looked at her in surprise. In her arms, Kazami lay unconscious. The girl with a pale face did not understand what she was seeing in front of her now. The guy in someone else's hands was massaging his head from pain and showing the first signs of life. He got up from the stranger's knees and saw Kuro in front of him. He calmly asked her what had happened. as if what she now saw was something ordinary. The girl in front of him was already barely holding back her tears. She was clearly ready to cry right now. She told Kazami, herself, that he wasn't at the door. But who knew that he was lying on the roof of the tower on Liz's lap? The man asked what she was making up. Actually, he was just beaten during sword training. He put his palms forward a little nervously, telling Liz to move away from him a little. Even though he had been taking care of her all this time, now he needed to treat his wounds. Kuro screamed at the top of her lungs that this was very serious. She told Kazami she herself could heal him with her magic. If it was for him, she would do it. The guy sheepishly tried to refuse her help. A man dressed like an aristocrat approached them. Adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose with his gloved hand, he sighed, saying, "Just look at this." Since his isolation was over, he thought he could give him a message from Juro-sama, but it seemed he was in the middle of a party with the two. He was asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. The boy, shouting, asked how he even thought of such a thing. The man turned around and added as he left that it was not good. It looked like the bed linen and mattresses needed to be changed. He would order the maids to do it. The guy kept trying to stop him, asking what he was thinking up. He yelled at the man to stand still and asked him to wait. Kara was already arguing with Liz, saying that she couldn't let her get ahead. Liz replied that all she did was take care of his treatment and she left everything else to her. The guy who was currently being ignored asked everyone to wait. He yelled for the two girls to stop and stop arguing about it. The guy covered his eyes in embarrassment, standing to the side. He folded his arms over his chest and chuckled thoughtfully. In the room with him were all the same people who were present on the roof of the tower. He said that since they had sorted out all this misunderstanding that was happening on the roof, he was thinking about what to do next. Since he was called into this world, he wants to help others with his skills and knowledge. He also thought about how to improve hygiene and living conditions for the people. This means he wants to improve medicine, agriculture, and livestock. At the moment, the city looked more like ruins and an abandoned place. Sitting on the bed, Liz hummed thoughtfully. She came to the conclusion that this was something a Shingo could do himself. But to do what he wants, they need authority, funding, and people. It will be very difficult for him now. If they increase the number of their achievements, won't they gain people's trust and authority? With his knowledge, they will be able to sell medicines and get money. If they get these two factors, they will have followers and military forces. Lisa, it's clear that they'll need money anyway. They can't do anything until they have money. As for combat power, he is going to buy Liz from Donnie. The man with glasses standing next to him said that there is some information about this. It turned out that Yuri herself is not going to interfere in Donya's affairs. Therefore, if he wants direct supervision over the night servants, then there is a snag. The guy immediately realized that in this case he would have to come up with something himself. The man was surprised by his quick answer, but he was still absolutely right in his conclusion. Starting a pharmaceutical company would be a profitable business, but they don't have enough connections. If there was someone who could invest in them, it would be very good right away. Getting money easily will be a difficult task. The guy agrees with Kuroi. Even in his world, earning money on your own was a very difficult task. He means that earning money is a very difficult task. But Kuroi thinks that they have a way to make money to some extent. She asked how about relying on them first. The guy looked at her in surprise. The girl came closer to the bookcase and stretched her hands up to the rolls on the very top shelf. She asked to look at it. She unrolled the roll of paper and placed it on the table. It turned out to be a map of the area. The man was surprised, calling it a treasure map. The girl said that it might seem strange, but it was the most accurate map of their world at the moment. Liz, who had been sitting on the bed a moment ago, had already laid down on it, watching the others with boredom. The guy saw a picture of a tree, a mountain, and asked what it was. The girl explained that it was a huge tree. If you translate it into its units of measurement, its height is 500 meters. The man explained that this land is ruled by a monster named Doriad, and he is the embodiment of this tree. And it is also said that there are deposits of mithril and orichalcum on its territory. Shingo asked if they weren't supposed to be rare legendary metals. They were probably worth a lot of money. The man replied that if he could find ore deposits there, he was sure they would have enough money to last for generations. But that doesn't mean they'll definitely find treasure there, so it'll be like a gambling game. That option will be like a backup. Are there really no other suggestions? He asked about places that definitely have treasures and are easy to get to. Kuroe remembered a place where there was definitely treasure and where it was relatively easy to get it, only one. And that was the lair of the Red Dragon. Any other places are like dungeons with lots of monsters. And the monsters in these places are on the level of the Hydra they defeated. These were places that Kazami doesn't really want to go near. He asked why she thought it would be easier to go to a dragon than to the others. Aren't dragons considered legendary monsters? The small griffin rested on the man's head while he talked to the others. They explained to him that this was all because dragons do not tolerate monsters on their territory and burn them with their fire. So most likely there will be only one dragon there. And also, if the dragon has intelligence and can speak, then during the fight with him, he will decide that he is strong and worthy of his treasures. He can simply give them to him. Now the man understood a little. But didn't that mean they had to fight him and win? That was what made him more worried. But that's impossible. Challenging a dragon is like challenging a natural disaster. It's just a story that if the dragon acknowledges them, they can get a reward. The title of legendary is not something to be taken lightly. The boy understood that this was so. It seemed to him that it would be impossible for him to even scratch him. And in general, he thinks that he will turn into ashes as soon as he meets him. This worries and scares him. Kuro is sure that Kazami can handle it. She was all glowing with admiration. The guy was shouting that no matter how hard he tried, it would still be impossible for him. How could she even think about it? Watching this from Liz's side, she laughed. In any case, the girl suggested just remembering this option. She asked how about relying on their magic and defeating the monster of a lower level. She showed a paper in her hands, on which was a rat-like monster. All three looked at the image in her hands and thought about defeating the fire rat. Present time Donnie's mansion. Someone shouted, asking what they had just said. The boy's ears rang from this shout, but he still repeated that he was going to the dragon's nest. The man with the mustache trembled, asking His Holiness not to say something so absurd. His nest is located near a volcano, and there are many monsters nearby, so even if they have several lives, they won't be able to defeat him. Although he has no idea how they will defeat him, he thinks that it is worth at least just looking at him. Kuroe says that dragons are able to establish a connection with humans, so he thinks that meeting him could lead to something good. But for him to go there personally doesn't seem like a smart idea, since he's the only one they have of the holy ones. If he has problems with money or the number of people who can follow him, he asked to be allowed to solve this issue himself. Why doesn't he just stay in Hydra and start working from there? Shingo smiled as he remembered the granary near the Hydra. Fire rats had been spotted there. He had heard that harvest season was approaching soon, and that he might be in danger because of it. So he thought he could prove his worth by completing this task and use the reward as funding for what he was going to do. As the man had already said, he asked not to say such nonsense. Why would His Holiness get involved with ordinary people? The man clearly did not understand this, but the hero wanted to add something else. Since he was talking about people who could accompany him, he asked if he could give him Liz. He smiled, but it was clearly not a simple request. The old man screamed in surprise. The hero would of course buy her back later. And the reward for the rats was 10 gold coins. And he had heard that the price of a servant was 1 gold coin, so he thought it was a fair price. The man tried to object. Since the dragon's nest is a dangerous place, without Liz's support, he might die. So he asked the man if he could do him a favor and give Liz away right now. The man was angry. He thought he was just a young man, but he didn't expect such arrogance. The man is sure that Shingo heard from the Knights of the Servants that something happened while he was gone for 10 days. He heard nothing of the sort. The man asked not to lie to him. After all, these servants are like a pack, and if something happens to them, they will immediately run to His Holiness. And he hid this from him. The boy denied it. He asked if the old man really thought he would ask him for something like that so boldly if he knew. In fact, he was making this offer so that neither of them would end up losing. The man still admitted that Kazami was right, and he accepted his proposal. He bowed to Shingo. He thought that if this was His Holiness, it would be very unpleasant to spoil relations with him because of something like this. The man noted that the hero was incredibly good at negotiating. Although he was the one who accepted his offer, he felt like he still owed him. This guy still knew when to bow his head, but he couldn't talk to him without embarrassment. The boy asked if he should answer like that now. He laughed. He doesn't understand what the old man in front of him means. To be honest, he certainly knows everything the man did here while he was in isolation. Nevertheless, He, knowing nothing, accepted his request about gullification and Hydra, and now Donnie-san is in his huge debt. And, if they continue in this spirit, won't they both end up winning? These words made the man think. He said that in that case it would be better to leave it at that. Kazami nodded and said that it was very kind of him. It's okay if he interprets it favorably, because they have a deeper relationship. It would also be good if he considers that he is not just a person who casually asks for favors and always comes out on top. After this, having achieved his goal, the hero decided to leave this room. Closing the doors behind him, in the remaining opening for a second, he could see the confused face of the man in front of him. Would there really be problems on the way to the greenery? Shingo tried to catch up with the little griffin that ran ahead after the butterfly, risking getting lost along the way. They walked forward along a beaten path at the edge of a hill. 4 horses and their riders climbed up the mountain, but there was one big obstacle in their way. It was a landslide. Shingo realized that this was a problem. This is too big of a landslide. Even with Liz's earth magic, she won't be able to clear a path. In general, Kazami thought so. In this case, the man decided to go ahead and look. He got off his horse and headed to reconnaissance. The hero thanked Chris. Behind Liz, the night servant Sarah looked out. The girl was interested in whether they would go back now. According to her, they could go back to the very beginning and find another way. But Liz still does not know what Donnie can do to her if they return to the Hydra. Sarah hugged the girl from the front, saying that this trip was so that His Holiness could later buy her. So if it was for her elder sister, she would do everything she could. Liz was a little confused by these words. The hero thought that they were representatives of different races, but were they really sisters? Liz replied that Sarah herself simply wished to call her that, so that was not it. She stuck her tongue out at the guy, saying that she admired her older sister very much. Chris has already looked at the situation and said that it is not good. The landslide continues further. It seems to him that it is better to choose another route for today. Since the landslide happened recently, the ground is still soft. If they want to walk through the landslide, they should leave the horses here. Even his shoes are completely covered in mud. Even in modern Japan, it would take a month to clear such a landslide. But they couldn't wait that long. He asked Chris if there was another way to get to the right place. He, shaking the dust off his clothes, replied that, fortunately, there was a city nearby. They can get to it and spend the night there tonight, and from tomorrow they can decide on the road they need. The hero thinks that they have no other choice, so he counts on Chris. He, climbing on his horse, told them to follow him. They arrived at a small, one-story house on a hill along the road. There's nothing else to see around, only a cliff and trees. Kazami was surprised by the house so deep in the forest. It was a small village with a population of 30 people. Chris thought they would have a place to spend the night. Dismounting from his horse, he decided to go and talk to the locals himself. He walked to the porch and climbed the steps and began knocking on the door. There was no answer. It's midday now. Most likely there will be no one here. The hero asked where they could go. Sira, raising her hand, said that she could smell that there was a barn behind her. Liz said that she could also hear that there was someone there. They decided to move in the direction the girls pointed, and in fact, in the barn, they found a man who was sitting on the ground sorting through something in a basin. Pointing his finger at him, Shingo asked what about him. Chris decided to talk to him. Sira was left to guard the horses and everything else. She sat down on the ground, unhappy with the situation, saying that she wanted to be near her older sister. The hero realized that Chris's conversation with the local would take some time. Liz confirmed this. There had been no complaints about bandit attacks from here, so they shouldn't be overly cautious. Well, Shingo didn't see why they might have any problems. Chris went back to his comrades and noticing his face. Kuroe asked if they had any problems. The man replied that it seemed they had no time for travelers. Apparently the cows have some kind of illness that makes them weak. They say that they have all their hands busy looking after the cows and have no time to receive guests. The hero thought it was strange this task was in his profession. He approached the owner who was standing near the cow lying on the hay. At first glance, he realized that everything was not very good, and the owner confirmed it. Since cows are very heavy, if they lie down for too long, their blood flow will be greatly impaired, and because of this, they can develop ulcers like necrosis. He squatted closer to the animal and began to examine it. That's why they take care of them, to cure their illness faster. They are very busy now. The hero, stroking the cow's nose, mooed thoughtfully. Chris said from behind that besides this, they apparently had another problem. Shingo turned around and asked what it was. The owner of the house said that a harpy had appeared here and was attacking their cattle. As a result, the cattle either died from falling on the rocks or from injuries from tripping. They wouldn't be able to survive if all their cattle died. The hero understood how serious this was. He wanted to ask the owner of the house a few questions. The first thing he was interested in was whether this happened every year. After this question, the owner was a little surprised. In general, they had to work very hard to have more calves, because the number of their cows was always decreasing due to this disease. Hearing these words, the heroes bent down to the animal's belly, starting to touch and examine it. He will not be able to accurately determine the disease until he does a blood test. But according to the description, the disease is similar to babesiosis. The owner tried to repeat it, this word, but he couldn't. He didn't understand what the guy meant at all. He repeated the name of the disease and said that it was a disease in which ticks carry pathogens that infect red blood cells. Animals show symptoms of anemia, jaundice, anorexia, fever, and asthenia. There is a risk of severe complications. But if the animal gets it and survives the next year, these symptoms will be milder, and the treatment will not require anything special. The owner was surprised and shocked at how he understood all this just by briefly looking at his cow. This is his specialty, so he is sure that he can be useful to them. The owner really does not understand anything anymore, but he is sure that the guy in front of him is simply an incredible person. If the owner is not against it, the hero would like to help him, and they can also solve his problem with the harpies. And all this in exchange for him letting them stay with him for one night. Although the grandfather did not understand a single word of his story, if he helped him with the cows, he would not mind providing them with a place to stay for the night. The hero promised to do everything in their power. The partners, watching his negotiations from the side, looked at him and were silent. And now Shingo suggested doing something against anemia for the cow. They need to be given food with lots of nutrients, and the cows need to rest a bit. Once they have met these conditions, the cows will be back on their feet within 2 to 3 weeks. They left the barn and Kuro called out to the hero. She wanted to know about babesiosis, or whatever he called it. She was very interested to know what it was. The guy happily decided to tell her that it was one of the 3 most common diseases in livestock, and it was transmitted by ticks. Ticks are insects that attach themselves to animals and suck their blood. The parasite that was in the tick then enters the bloodstream and thus infects the cattle. Cattle often become infected with this disease due to interaction with field ticks. A pathogen is a type of parasite that infects red blood cells and begins to multiply in them. That's why cows have a hard time moving, because they simply don't have enough red blood cells, which causes the cattle to show symptoms of anemia and jaundice. Kuro asked what jaundice is. This is a disease in which the body cannot get rid of used red blood cells. The characteristic feature of this disease is that the body and eyes turn yellow. The disease itself is not really very dangerous, but it often comes with a number of other diseases. In his world, there is a special method to combat babesiosis, but they do not have time for it. The best thing they can do now is to eradicate the cause of this disease. Kuro remembered that the cause of the disease was tiny mites. Wouldn't it be difficult to destroy them all? It was really beyond her comprehension. But Kazami said it really wasn't that hard. They had 2 options to solve the problem. The first is to not let the cows graze in the pasture for 5 years. Then the ticks will have nowhere to reproduce and feed, as a result of which their population will decrease and they will die out. The second option is to completely burn the entire grazing field so that next year soft grass will grow there, unsuitable for ticks to live. At this point, it would probably be too hard for the cows to stay in a barn for 5 years, so the best solution for them would be to simply burn all the grazing fields. The owner was happy with this solution, because that's exactly what they could do without any problems. Now they better find out about the tick's habitat, and then they should figure out what to do with the harpy. Kuroe agrees with him. Liz looked at them strangely. She folded her arms across her chest and watched them silently with a strange expression on her face. After this conversation, the owner decided to go and tidy up the sleeping places for the guests. Kuroe bowed to the owner of the house, thanking him for everyone present. Liz sighed and glanced at the guy, and said that Shingo was doing as usual. The guy didn't quite understand what she meant, but said that it looked like it. Now he decided to consider that they had dealt with a disease. but he still asked who the harpies were. Kuroe decided to tell him about it herself. Harpies are demons. Their heads and bodies are similar to humans, but the lower part and arms are like birds. They do not know human speech and are incredibly harmful. She's heard that they migrate south in flocks as winter approaches, so she thinks this harpy has simply gotten separated from its flock and is acting alone here. Liz thinks the easiest option would be to make a chicken dish out of her. But the guy says that they shouldn't kill her anyway. It would be best if they could catch her and release her back to her pack, or they'd have to come up with something else. Liz looked at him with displeasure and sighed and said that he always made things difficult. She was clearly not happy with his decision. She told Shingo to think of them as rabbits, but this is a middle-class demon. It takes a lot of strength to catch a demon. Doesn't he have a goal that requires money from exterminating fire rats? Kill one and leave the other alive. Thinking about it, she understands that who will live and who will die depends entirely on his decision. Kuro wanted to object, but he stopped her. He understands what they want to tell him. If it turns out to be dangerous, you will have no choice but to take someone's life. He does not like to make decisions based only on what he can get. Whatever the reason, Liz would follow him anyway. It's just that no one had said anything about it, so she decided to bring it up herself. He understands this. But no matter what happens, he will protect people who are important to him. And this part is not about losses and gains. Embarrassed, Liz turned away, thinking that she was part of what he didn't want to lose. She gave in and told him to do whatever he wanted. At this point in the conversation, Chris intervened, asking permission to tell him something as well. Kazami was going to help every person in trouble. And, fortunately, this time it wouldn't have any serious consequences. But soon, they might meet people who are terrorized by a more dangerous demon or a more dangerous disease. He asked them to think about whether he should interfere next time. The hero didn't understand what he was getting at. He meant that when comparing him to other people, he should understand that he has no replacement. He asked to keep in mind that he is different from others. He understands what Chris is telling him. But if there is no one to treat people, the situation can get worse. And he believes that there are things that cannot be measured by the amount of work or risk to life. Now, Chris did not understand what he was talking about. Many people are in a difficult situation, and he has knowledge of agriculture and the environment. He will be useful in improving the food situation. Many of the reforms of his world were not carried out by cowards, and by this they improved the world through trial and error. In their case, they had to do everything they could right here and now, because if they kept trying, eventually they would get somewhere. That's why they shouldn't give up on something just because he was irreplaceable. Chris finally understood what His Holiness was trying to get across to him and said that he was right after all. Shingo also knows methods to avoid getting infected with something dangerous, and he wishes they would trust him more. Chris asked if he still plans to deal with demons now. The hero will not kill anyone, even if it is just a stray harpy. He will also be careful not to catch something nasty from her. But if he fails, then he will leave everything to his companions. Chris looked at him silently, trying to think about his words and make his own decision about this. Still, closing his eyes and bowing his head, he said that they would end the conversation with this. He agreed to all the conditions. Liz didn't care much about such things, and Kuro was willing to help him with all her might to be useful to Kazami. The hero thanked everyone. In that case, as they had planned, he suggested going to check on the harpy. The blonde agreed, and about the harpy, she had a suggestion to ask the villagers its exact location before they left. There's also a rare plant growing nearby. She asked if they could collect it along the way. Hearing about the rare plant, Kazami smiled and wondered what kind of plant it was. It turned out to be the infamous mandrake. After thinking for a bit, the guy asked if it wasn't that plant that started screaming as soon as you pulled it out of the ground. This turned out to be the right answer. This is the panacea of this world that helps with any disease, and also has one very interesting property. But realizing that it is not particularly decent, the girl waved her hands and began to deny. She felt very ashamed. Putting her hands forward, she shouted that there were also other rare plants here besides mandrake that he could get. The guy looked at her questioningly, but he was still interested in what she was telling him. The embarrassed girl said that she would probably go and ask the villagers about the harpy's location and ran away, leaving everyone behind. Liz asked, puzzled, what she was hiding, while Chris silently adjusted his glasses behind her. Kazami didn't even know how to explain it to her. Still, if it was a mandrake, he definitely wanted it. He suggested that they gradually get ready to go, and the others agreed with him. At this time, Sarah was still guarding the horses and other things. She was still sitting in the same place. One of the horses seemed to have confused her with grass and started chewing her hair. Sarah continued to complain and call for her sister. Sarah jumped out of the bushes holding a huge hare in her hands. She screamed to the whole neighborhood that she had caught it. She, holding him by the ears, was very happy because with this, their dinner would be wonderful. The guy looked at her in surprise because she had already caught the second hare. He praised Sarah for her good work. She knows he wants to praise her, but only her sister can do that. She looked very embarrassed saying that. She immediately ran to Lisa, shouting to her sister to see what Sarah did. The guy, embarrassed from being ignored, said that he would leave it to her then. Liz, on the contrary, was unhappy that he was dumping it on her. She asked Sarah, who was already hugging her tightly, not to come so close to her. But the girl did not listen to her at all. She really wanted her to praise her. Her eyes were shining. She showed with her hand how to massage her ear to praise her. Even the hair in her hands looked like he didn't like the situation at all. Liz was already calling Shingo to help her somehow, but he turned his back to her and ran forward, apparently not wanting to do anything. At that moment, one palm appeared from the darkness of the bushes, and someone began to call Kazami-sama. It was Kuro. She was asking if it was really necessary to check for ticks when passing through groves and meadows. The girl looked very exhausted. She leaned her whole weight on a large stick to somehow rest. He explained that ticks attach themselves to wild animals and grasses that grow on the trails they pass through. This is painful, but it is important to identify the source of the infection and rule out those that are not. For example, if you eat insects, worms, or shellfish, they may have parasites in their brains or organs. For the safety of people and animals that deal with insect parasites, this becomes quite important. The girl was disgusted by this. Also, there are plants and insects that he doesn't know, so he needs to collect samples. They don't have a remedy for worms. Because it's important, they take precautions against parasites. Liz noticed that he was too happy. In any case, he suggested that everyone stop collecting samples for the time being. Everyone agreed with great enthusiasm. Sarah asked if he was going to take the rabbit she had caught as a sample. He said they would take the ticks that floated up and the meat they could eat. They would skin it and put the fur in water. Sarah was looking forward to it. Shingo asked Chris if this rabbit was enough for all of them for dinner. He replied that it was enough and they could make some canned goods from the leftovers. He decided to leave it to Chris and go with the others to check on the harpy. The man waved at them, telling them to be careful on the way. They were walking in a grove of trees and bushes. One of the boys suggested that this mountain was probably full of plants. Kuro pointed her finger somewhere to the side and said that there was a rare medicinal plant there. The guy asked what it did. It turned out that it would slow down the blood circulation so that he could use it to make an ointment to stop bleeding. Liz listened to their conversation and understood absolutely nothing. Sarah told her sister that she also understood absolutely nothing of what they were saying. Liz turned around and said that the path goes higher, so Shingo shouldn't leave it. He replied that everything was fine, but he was often distracted. Looking at what he had in his hand, he asked if this was the plant that Kuro had just told him about. She praised, saying that, as expected of him, he recognized it immediately. The guy said that it was because it had a distinct appearance. Liz just sighed heavily. She wondered how long it would last. The climb was finally over. Sarah sighed heavily and said that it was quite a hard climb. Even Liz confirmed it. But it was quite cool. Turning around, she did not see the guy among them and asked where Shingo had gone. Kuroai started to turn her head around, but she couldn't find him anywhere. She was very surprised because he was walking next to her just recently. Liz was surprised that this guy managed to get lost in the mountains full of monsters. Kuroai asked in a panic what they should do now. Liz had thought about it for a long time. But Shingo becomes different when he goes outside. What's worse is that he is especially recklessly animated. Could he be some kind of wild animal or spirit? The blonde panicked and shouted that now was not the time for such jokes. She remembered one thing. She asked Liz if she could find out where he was by smell. The girl tried to sniff, but whether he was blown by the wind or covered in sand, she couldn't smell him at all. At least they haven't been attacked by any monsters yet, so he'll probably be okay. The girl is panicking and saying that she couldn't be so careless with him. What if something happens to Kazami herself? Shingo knows a lot about the structure of creatures and their weak points. He is good at dissection. The monsters in this area are weak. Even the griffin he brought could drive them away. If they move as planned, the harpy nest, they will collide with each other. Kuruo asked with horror on her face if they were really just going to leave him now and move on. Liz asked if she still had the harpy anesthesia Shingo had given her. The girl replied that no problem, they could do the job themselves, but she was clearly not happy about it. Liz agreed to do it herself. Luckily, their target and this village were easy to find. They didn't have to worry about losing Shingo. Kuroya could only agree with that. Meanwhile, Kazami was sneaking around in the bushes, trying to stay hidden from the others. He suddenly stuck his head out of the greenery and began to look around. A small griffin was sitting on his neck, clinging to the hero's hair with its paws so as not to fall. Shaking his head from side to side, he thought that this was strange. Before he noticed, they had already separated from the team. The guy called his griffin, asking if he knew where they were now. The griffin seemed to understand him and began to say something in his own language. Still, he thinks that it was a bad idea. It is unlikely that a griffin could know something like that. Right from the bushes, some strange, frightening sounds began to be heard, and someone began to scream. It turned out that a second pet began to gnaw the found mandrake with great appetite. And it, in turn, as everyone said, screamed pitifully. Watching this, the guy decided to separate them in different directions, removing the pet from the plant. It somehow looked at the hero too, plaintively and tiredly. It must be what they call a mandrake. But can it understand him? He thinks not. The plant began to make some sounds similar to human ones again. The guy was so scared that he let go of the plant and his pets, screaming that it could talk. Having stepped on two legs, the plant successfully landed on the ground and ran towards the guy. He continued to shout that this was simply impossible, and what kind of plant was this? It would be very scary if there were more of them at night. He didn't understand what to do. In any case, it would be unpleasant if this scream attracted someone here. For example, monsters. He grabbed the griffin by the arms and the second pet. He ran away thinking what to do in such a situation. Starting to look around, he decided that the best plan would be to run as fast and as far away from there as possible. Instead of going back the way they came, he should go to his destination and possibly cross paths with the rest of his team. But after some time of running, he got quite tired. Having let go of the animals and put them on the ground, he, hunched over, tried to catch his breath. Finally, he was able to die, relieved that it was no longer pursuing him. His pets were not tense at all. The one that had recently chewed the mandrake, causing it to scream, was calmly chewing other grass in the meadow. The guy noticed this and, kneeling closer to the pet, began to examine this grass. Grabbing it by the leaves, he wondered if it could be an unripe mandrake. To confirm his guess, he wanted to start pulling it, but still stopped in time. This can be dangerous. When you pull out the mandrake, it will start screaming. The mandrake is known for its deadly voice, which can kill a person. And this scares him. It seems that this could be a universal remedy. He really wants it, but something stops him. In fairy tales, he heard that they tie a rope to a dog, and it pulls out a mandrake. He looked at his griffin that was sitting on his head, thinking that Guri was still too small to help him with this. But Liz would be very useful to him at this moment. The girl herself turned around at that moment, as if she heard someone calling her from the side. They need to recover. Shingo can't even imagine how to take this mandrake with him, so that it doesn't become dangerous for them. But he really wants to get it at any cost, although he has no idea how. At that moment, he heard something to the side and turned around, but he was suddenly knocked down by a blow to the stomach. A second later, a girl appeared on it who seemed not to be human at all. Some part of her body resembled a plant, but her upper body was still female. The guy trembled from surprise and embarrassment. He didn't understand what was so soft and heavy on him now. It seemed like just a little more and he would be in a complete panic. Liz and Kuro arrived just in time. Liz was complaining about Shingo being too slow, while the other was telling him to quickly step aside so they could help him. But the guy quickly stopped them, asking them to wait. He didn't understand why they were attacking, because the creature wasn't aggressive at all. He finally came to his senses and began to examine her. He asked if this girl was a magical creature. But overall, it was noticeable because the lower part of the body was made of leaves and roots that were connected to her body. Elfram told that this Alrona is a magical creature. As ordered, she sighed and put away her sword, placing it on her shoulder. The guy noticed that the girl in front of him was not covered in clothes. Kuro asked if Shingo was okay. He replied that he was fine. Liz told Shingo that the Alrounds eat everything from cattle to people, and so they multiply and give birth to new mandrakes. So even the ivy that was placed on his body, she can use to wrap around his neck and strangle him. Because of this, it is worth getting rid of her now. Now it became a little clearer to him how new mandrakes were created, which made him panic. However, even if they say that it needs to be gotten rid of, for some reason he really wants to do it. Sira noticed that he now had a terribly obscene face and called them names. This made the guy think a little, and he shook his head, trying to get the vicious thoughts out of his head. He reminded them that their target was a harpy, so if the Alaron wasn't going to attack them, there was no point in killing it. Liz pointed out that it was only attacking him, and besides, if it stayed here, it would be a problem when they started hunting the harpy. He didn't understand why they were doing this, because she lived here. Didn't they feel sorry for her? They were the ones who invaded her territory, not the other way around. Kuroe was now extremely angry. She was already preparing her weapon, asking Kazami whether he himself was saying this solely for good reasons, or was there some other reason. Very scared, the guy shouted that he had no hidden motives, and she should understand this herself, right? The girl with a face full of ill intentions tried to smile, saying that of course she understood, but she was interested in how long this creature would be on his lap. After these words, the guy instantly came to his senses and jumped to his feet, saying that they had better put their swords in their sheaths and get away from here. He told everyone to follow him and quickly deal with the harpy. Since they were not attacked, he thought that there was nothing else to do. Elle sighed. Spreading her arms to the side, she agreed to act as he said. And right now, they needed to go and find the harpy. The guy himself stopped for a moment and looked back and asked the girls in front of him to wait a bit. Looking at the roots of the creature, he said that she needed to be given one plant to heal the wounds before they went away. The servant sighed, saying how strange he was, because now he was trying to cure a monster, not a person. But he thought that she was alive. And besides, he was a veterinarian, so he didn't see much of a difference. Liz reminded him that the sun was already setting. She considered Shingo too exemplary, but that was basically why she respected him. But one view completely interfered with Shingo's work and distracted him. He tied the girl's upper body with bandages so that at least it wouldn't be too noticeable. Kuro, who was standing next to him, was already full of anger. He smoothed out some cuts on her body and then used one product. The monster girl seemed to come to life herself. The guy was pleased with his work, asking her how she liked the result. The girl noticed that her roots had been torn recently and were now in their previous state. She could easily move them, which surprised her greatly. The boy rose from his knees, looming over the monster. He looked down at his work, thinking that he had done a pretty good job. Kurue, who was standing behind him, was smiling despite being very angry. She suggested that they hurry up and continue on their way. In her thoughts, she was thinking that just looking at this situation was causing her great pain. The guy finally left the monster and approached his companions, wishing Al round to take care of herself one last time. They walked forward and saw that among the other trees, one stood out very strongly. Inside its thick trunk, a huge hole was visible. From this hole in the pitch darkness, one small wing was visible, reminiscent of a bird's. Confused, I asked Kazami if this was the place they were looking for. Finally, they met the harpy. The boy came closer to the hollow, telling the others that if he came alone, she wouldn't be alarmed, so he would go and check her out himself. Corral worriedly told him to be careful. After all, he was heading towards the demon. A small creature was curled up in a hollow and sleeping. It looked like a girl with a human head and upper body. Instead of skin, her legs and arms were covered with feathers like a bird. The guy stared at the sleeping creature. He realized that it was definitely a harpy. He had to check if everything was okay with her while she was still motionless. He, having come a little closer, began to examine her wings instead of arms and legs with his eyes. On her thigh, he noticed frayed feathers. Her thigh was clearly swollen. He, without fear, extended his hand into the hollow, practically touching her thigh. At that moment, the griffin on his head leaned forward strongly, spreading its wings. Unable to keep its balance, it fell headfirst into the hollow. The guy leaned inside trying to get Guri. He was panicking a lot because he knew they had to be quiet. He kept hoping that Gur would read his thoughts, but when he leaned in, the second pet also fell inside the hollow. The guy was already panicking while his pets were jumping from side to side. At one point, the harpy began to wake up from rustling sounds. The bailiff, leaning on one of her wings, she directed her gaze straight at the guy, examining him. He immediately trembled. He was very scared. In his head, he understood that this situation was very bad. Putting his hands forward, he didn't know what to do. He asked Madame Harpy to just calm down. He wouldn't hurt her. He told her to pay attention to the fact that he didn't even have a weapon. He just came to check on her condition. The griffin on his head raised its wings aggressively and screamed. In response to this, the harpy also became angry and, hitting the wall of the hollow with its wing, began to hiss. The situation was very bad. The demon in front of them was clearly very angry. But, surprisingly, she did not attack them yet, only watched from the spot. Raising her wings with claws up, looking at them, she began to swing her claws, trying to strike. The guy with the pets tried to dodge and turned around in the other direction and ran away from the monster. The blonde called Kazami worriedly, asking herself if he was okay. She saw what was happening from afar. The guy answered a little worriedly that he was not injured at all, so overall, everything was okay. The only thing was that he was very scared. Liz sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. She was curious about his plan. Was he still planning to catch her on his own? The guy was smiling and scratching his head. He knew it would be difficult. Guri had provoked her a little, and now she was very aggressive towards them. He would be scared too if he woke up and saw someone he didn't know nearby. She might also have a fever. I wonder if they could calm her down. Liz clearly expected a different answer, but she said that everything was clear to her. She suggested first to fix it and then proceed further. Korei decided to catch it with her chain. While the others were in the bushes, she moved forward towards the monster, stretching her left arm forward from under her robe in the sleeve. A metal chain flew out, heading straight for the target. The harpy, having already left its hollow, was moving straight towards her, spreading its wings. At this moment, the chain was already approaching her. From the blow, everyone present covered their eyes with their hands from the sand that was flying towards them. The harpy was already in the air and looked at the chain flying past her. Then Kura decided to repeat this action again, but again nothing worked. The harpy was able to dodge again. The hero realized that this would lead to nothing. He turned to Leek saying that he would go set up a couple of traps. It was a good idea, but did they have the tools for it? While they were talking in the background, the blonde was still swinging the chain. The boy didn't have any equipment with him, but he could always gather some. He needed Kuro to hold out as long as possible until he was done. Elle sighed and said that she would pass on his words and asked if she needed help with this. But the hero wanted to try to do everything himself. He was already moving in the other direction, but suddenly remembered something. Turning back to the servant, he asked about the Alarona. He wondered if she had ever attacked him to trick him and eat him later. Liz shrugged and said she had no idea. She wasn't an Alarona, so what to answer that question? However, it is still known that they hate them instinctively, and she does not think that they will like him just because he is from another world. The boy thought that it seemed to depend on the methods. If so, then they would need to subdue the harpy for a while. All that was left for Liz to do was warn Shingo to be careful. The guy was running with a griffin on his head between the bushes. Pushing the greenery aside with his hands, he noticed pieces of ivy torn from bodies. This clearly meant that he was already close to his goal. Walking a little further, he gathered some ivy clippings and showed them to the nearby Alrounds, saying that they would borrow some from them. 2 Alruans smiled as if they understood him, giving their silent consent to his request. The hero grabbed the scraps and thought to himself if his plan would work. He began to tie them together little by little, creating a rope. The monsters in this world seem stronger than humans, so he hopes everything will be okay. Shaking his hands after the work he had done, he looked at what he had done and thought that with this, the task would be finished. From the bushes nearby, some rustling and sounds began to be heard. A moment later, right in front of him, from the greenery, appeared the already familiar mandrake, which one of his pets had recently bitten. She looked at the guy with a strange expression on her face. The guy knelt down in front of the mandrake and began asking her if she was with him that time. He clearly recognized her by the bite. To his surprise, the mandrake answered him by saying that it was her. He asked the plant if all those who were taken out were doing the same thing, meaning the deafening scream. The plant's answer was again positive. Laughing, the guy noticed that he really was repeating the same thing like a parrot. He again answered him that it was true. Kazami, tilting his head to the side, thoughtfully looked at the shaking plant. It stopped shaking. The mandrake in front of him sneezed loudly, causing clouds of dust to fly out of her nose. This scared the guy a lot. Covering his nose with his hand, he realized it was pollen. But most likely, you shouldn't touch unfamiliar substances, so he immediately turned around and waved goodbye to the Alvarans, thanking them for the ivy. Now, following the plan further, all he had to do was lure the harpy. It was better to leave Guri and Tura somewhere safe so as not to provoke the demon again and harm them. He came out into the clearing where Kuro was still fighting the monster. He peered out from behind a tree trunk and shouted at her to lure the demon to his side. The blonde, having accepted the order, turned around and ran in the direction she was told. As they thought, the harpy flew right after them. Kazami said that the trees would hinder her flight and he wanted her to get confused here. Kure, understanding his plan, said to leave this task to her. The harpy had already begun to prepare a strike, gradually descending to attack. At that moment, Kazami grabbed Kuro by the waist and turned his back to the monster to protect the girl. He told her to lie down on the ground and cover her ears. At one point, the monster flew into the ivy stretched between the trees. It was tied to a mandrake in the ground and, stretching to the limit, pulled the plant out of the ground. At that moment, the disturbed mandrake began to scream furiously, deafening everyone around her. The guy, covering his ears, trembled. This sound was very loud and had a bad effect on the person. Despite trying to protect his ears, when he opened his eyes, he saw that everything in front of him was blurry. Everything around him was floating and distorted. Mandrake finally fell silent, only trembling on the ground. The harpy, who could not defend herself, was still hanging on the same ivy above the ground, having lost consciousness from screaming. Shing said as he got off Kuro that it was a pretty impressive fantasy world version of a stun grenade. He and the girl were clearly in a bad way after that attack from the mandrake. It was evident on their faces. The hen asked with a cloudy face if it was a mandrake. Her face looked like she was going to puke. The boy confirmed her guess and pointed up at the ivy tied to the trees. He had set the trap so that if the harpy got caught in it, it would pull the mandrake out of the ground. Realizing that there was no more time to waste, he said that they needed to quickly get her to the village and heal her broken bones. He sat next to the harpy, who had not yet regained consciousness. Kure was very surprised that he had already managed to determine the demon's injury. It was obvious to him because her right leg was swollen. He could see that her entire leg was bent, except for the joint itself, and it looked like it was broken. And now that he could examine her leg, he realized how she had injured herself by pulling it a little. Even if they and veterinarians cannot always rely on science, they need diagnostic techniques. Animals are large and heavy and can be quite cruel, so using conventional methods is somewhat difficult. And so he decided to go take care of the rest of the mandrake traps he had set. He asked if the girl could call the others. She happily asked him to give her the task. She looked away silently. A silent mandrake was sticking out of the ground, continuing to move its limbs as if trying to climb back into the ground. This is a rare mandrake plant, and of course, if she leaves it, it will simply go away and bury itself somewhere else. If she wanted to use the mandrake, this was her chance to harvest it. The mandrake was famous as a powerful aphrodisiac, and she had one right in her hands. She pulled the plant out of the ground and sat on her knees, silently looking at it, thinking, the plant can fulfill one of her wishes, even though it is vicious. She was called from the side, because of which she, coming out of her thoughts, shuddered. It was Liz, who, scratching her head from pain, asked why she was just standing in such a place. Frightened, the girl quickly turned around and hid the plant in her hands behind her back. She tried to justify herself by saying that she had done nothing wrong. The mandrake in her hands began to move and make sounds, which later turned into a quiet mooing, betraying her actions to others. Liz looked at her strangely and said that she seemed to hear something. Sarah behind her did not understand what kind of sound was coming from the side. Kuro, trying to smile casually, said that maybe something was ringing in her ears. Liz was clearly uninterested and in fact didn't care at all. She turned around and asked where Shingo was. She was told that it looked like he had set up more traps than necessary, so he was disarming them. Liz clutched her head tiredly, saying that setting up a trap like that was even more cruel than just beating her. Suddenly, the servant pricked up her ears. They all turned their attention to the direction where the strange sounds were coming from. A bunch of mandrakes were coming straight at them. They heard the commotion and gathered together. The pollen they emitted caused hallucinations, and if you inhaled it, you would enter a trance state and then straight into the belly of the Alron. The servant immediately called Shingo, who jumped out from the bushes behind them and asked what had happened. His sudden appearance greatly frightened Sarah. Liz clutched her head, exhausted. She thought he was a wild animal that had suddenly appeared. She couldn't smell anything in this forest. A crowd of mandrakes had gathered around them. They had learned that there was plenty of food here and were now trying to cover the entire area with pollen. If they didn't want to become an Arana's dinner, they should get out of here now. The guy, embarrassed, apologized to everyone. The reason for their gathering was most likely his trap. He felt awkward in front of others for this. Liz said that it was indeed possible because of the traps. She looked away for a second and asked if he had carried it right in front of the Alron earlier. The guy said that it had. He placed the harpy on his back and told everyone to return to the village where they would begin treating the harpy. After these words, everyone moved forward straight along the path back to the lodge. Finally arriving at a guest house that a local resident had given them, they laid the harpy on a haystack to make it more comfortable. Now they can begin treatment. First, he needs to be numbed with morphine, and then anesthetized. He asked Kuro to let the harpy breathe ether for 2 minutes, and then check if she was conscious and felt pain. She replied that she understood his task. Having done everything she said, she noticed that everything seemed to be fine with her. In that case, he decided to proceed with the operation on the fracture site. Pulling gloves on his hands, he looked relaxed. The girl stepped aside while he approached the demon and began to press his hands on the fracture site. It didn't look very good. Shocked, Kurele covered her mouth with her hand and stuttered. She asked Kazami, herself, about whether he wasn't trying to heal her fracture. If that was so, then she didn't understand why he kept breaking her bone. Her face turned pale from what she saw. The guy, confused, began scratching his head, trying to figure out how to explain everything to her. He said that usually there is no need for this technique. Fixing it with a splint or plaster would be enough in another situation. But in the case of this harpy, everything is a little different and these methods will not work. The girl did not quite understand why this was. He explained that when a bone breaks, the body forms a callus in areas close to the fracture. It hardens around the fracture area and helps the body heal it. However, this is only temporary. Like any old wound, this measure is weak against further damage. This can easily cause things to heal incorrectly. If the bone heals incorrectly, the length of the legs can vary and become a burden on the legs and lower back. In the case of the harpy, the fracture healed incorrectly so that it gives the bones the desired shape. The girl now understood. Liz, standing nearby with her arms crossed over her chest again, thought that this was a rather creepy treatment. The guy couldn't deny that it looked really creepy. Having finally completed all the actions he wanted, he ran his hand over his forehead, wiping away the sweat. In his opinion, the wound already looked better than before. He asked Hiro if she could heal the wound a little. The girl was excited and asked him to leave the matter to her. She was happy that he trusted her with something like this. Approaching the harpy, she put her palms to the wound. Light began to radiate from them, healing the creature's sore spot. The girl looked very calm and confident in her actions. The boy began to take off his gloves, looking at the fracture site after Kuroi's actions. He realized that the effectiveness of magic and the latest advances in medicine were amazing. The fracture had probably recovered to the level of a small crack, and the swelling had gone. He stroked the girl's head with his hand, thanking her. The satisfied healer began to smile, saying that it was Kazami herself who should be thanked. The guy continued to stroke her, which caused her face to turn very red, and she began to tremble with embarrassment. Now she resembled a volcano that was ready to explode in a matter of seconds. Liz called Shingo, saying that harpy feathers would serve well as weapons. It seemed she didn't really expect him to agree with her, but she said it anyway. If they just let her go, all the effort of catching her would be in vain. Although he would still let her go, wouldn't he? He did all this so she could return to her pack. If they took the feathers, all the treatment would be useless, so he definitely wouldn't do that. Instead, he wanted to study her skeletal and muscular structure while she was so calm under anesthesia. He looked like a maniac as he approached the unconscious body of the harpy, who now looked like his victim. Liz noticed again how curious he was. But there's nothing to be done about it, because her owner is clearly not a simple person and looks more like a pervert than a scientist. Kazami called her a dog and asked her not to say that, because it's debatable which of them is the real pervert. Having fallen silent, he looked to the side, noticing Kuro, who had been watching him from the side all this time. In her hands was a cup with some liquid. Stuttering, she called Kazami. She handed him a mug. He must have been tired, so she brewed him some herbs that would give him energy and asked him to help himself. But seeing this drink, it was clear that it would not be very tasty. But still, he did not want to offend her and answered that he just wanted a drink, and it was very timely. He took the glass from her hands, thanking her for worrying about him. As he began to drink it, he drained the contents of the mug in one gulp and his face turned pale. The girl explained that the drink had a rough taste due to a couple of roots. Stuttering from this terrible taste, he asked what kind of herb was in this drink. Avoiding the answer, she decided to say that there was a lot of stuff in it and did not list the ingredients. It was her own recipe just for Kazami herself, so he should not worry about it. As soon as he finished drinking, the girl immediately snatched the glass from his hands and, smiling, turned away, deciding to leave the room for a short while. Liz also decided to leave, and passing by the guy said that it seemed they decided to get someone drunk. The man, not understanding what she meant, asked her again, but did not receive an answer to his question. The servant, ignoring him, grabbed Sarah by the shoulders and pushed her towards the exit. They needed to go to their room and rest. But there were only 2 beds, so they wouldn't be able to go somewhere else to rest anyway. Kurue hugged the guy around the waist and said that he should also rest. She was clearly in high spirits, as if she had done something nasty. Liz lay down on one of the beds, covering herself with a blanket. Another 2 or 3 hours will pass and the effect of the anesthesia will end, so in principle you can rest until then. The blonde happily answered that she thought that this time would be enough for them. Kuro lay down next to Kazami, contentedly pressed herself against his back and waited for some reaction from the medicine. The guy himself lay calmly on the same bed, turned away from the wall. The girl's behavior made him suspicious. At one point he shuddered, beginning to realize the situation. He finally understood what Kuro had done. But for now, he decided to deal with her a little later, because right now his condition did not allow him to do so. After a while, they continued their journey up the hill. The girls rode horses, and the guy, having grabbed all the pets and seated the harpy on his back, moved on foot. The harpy was already conscious and was pressing down on the boy's neck with her wing as if trying to strangle him. Liz was riding next to him on her horse. She called out to Shingo, asking if he would take this thing with him when they defeated the fire rat, right? He said that if she goes back to that village there will be a lot of problems, so he thinks to let her out somewhere along the road or a little further. The girl sighed heavily in her opinion. Shingo is doing everything too strangely and complicating his life. Humans and monsters are incompatible with each other by nature. When one meets the other, they immediately start fighting. Despite this, he gives her a ride, not even having the opportunity to defend himself from her. She does not know which relationship is stranger. Trying to protect himself from the harpy that was practically fighting a griffin right on his shoulders, he replied that he had covered his chest with a towel just in case, as if that could protect him in any way. But that was clearly not the problem. He looked tired from the griffin, and demon still arguing on his shoulders. He stopped and said that he thought this place they were passing now would be just right to let her go. He sat down on the ground and lowered the demon from his back. He thought that everything would be fine, so he told her to fly away and return to her flock. The demon, spreading her wings, immediately rose into the air, watching the guy waving at her from above. Chris, who was standing behind him, said that he seemed to have managed to sort out the problem. The guy wasn't so sure about it, but he did his best. Chris suggested that they return to the main task, but he asked what they should do with the fire rat. He wasn't going to solve the problem, just like with the demon. Still, if he didn't defeat her, he wouldn't see the reward for her head. So the answer was already obvious. Still many ways to solve this problem. Grabbing the horse's reins, he suggested that the others continue their journey forward. He is glad that he will finally ride a horse. Chris only sighed heavily at this. Kuro approached and exchanged glances with him. She didn't want to sound rude, but Kazami knew pharmaceuticals, toxicology, zoology, physiology, and nutritional science. He was an intelligent man in many fields. She couldn't imagine what he was thinking about right now. But Liz thought it didn't matter anyway since they were going to kill the fire rat. They were Shingo's teammates, so even if he failed or screwed up, it would be okay. He, smiling, answered her that if he was useless, he could only count on them. So he hoped for their help if something happened. Hearing his words, Liz sighed again, but this time she was smiling. Kure jumped up with delight after his words. After some time on their way, they arrived at the grain-producing region of the city of Mirament. In the guy's opinion, this town looked quite calm. Since its foundation, it has been a peaceful, decent city, and strong monsters do not appear here very often. Chris suggested that they go to the station first. It was not far from them. There was a young guy in uniform standing behind the counter, and there were only a couple of people in line. As soon as he finished serving them, he shouted for the next one to come. Looking at Chris's team, he asked if they came here to hunt the fire rat. Chris said that it was obvious. The Hydra Guild sent them here. He took out a sealed letter and showed it to the servant, saying that it was an invitation from a local feudal lord. The servant jumped nervously, not believing it. Stammering, he asked to give him the letter so that he could look at it. Chris said he had heard that they would have a place to stay, and asked if that was true. The trembling boy replied that they had a cottage ready for them, and he would take them there right away. After some time, they saw a 2-story wooden house with a large area around it. Inside the house was very well maintained and well lit. The attendants explained that when the day bell rang, there would be an introductory lecture on the task for all participants in the guild hall. When the time came, he asked them to be there. Once he had told them everything that was required, he, being a little nervous, said goodbye to them, saying that it was time for him to leave. Kazami called Chris, asking him if he had accidentally said that he had come to hunt for a fire rat. He noted that he was never noticed. It turned out that for his safety, he told them that he was a specialist, a monstrologist sent by the guild. Not quite understanding, he asked if there was any threat here. Liz noted that he would make a great hostage. If he were kidnapped, he could fetch a lot of money. Scratching his head, he seemed to be starting to understand what they were talking about. If they were here in an isolated cottage, they didn't have to worry about random people in the hotel that they didn't know anything about, so they didn't have to worry that much. In any case, they still had time until the evening, so Kazami suggested conducting an investigation. Liz was a little confused about why this was being done. She thought that they would be briefed in the guild hall. At least that's what the employee told them. But superficial information was not needed by Kazami. He wanted to find data on the fire rat. Liz sighed heavily again, realizing that Shingo's illness had apparently awakened again. They would form a guard for him so that he would have nothing to fear. The guy thanked her for her assistance. Smiling, he asked Kuro if she would go with them, and she said yes. In that case, Chris decided to get supplies. After a while, finally finishing their business, they arrived at the guest cottage again and informed Chris that they had arrived. Liz turned back to the guy, saying that he smelled a little unpleasant. He sniffed himself and said that it seemed like the smell had stuck to him now. But they had been cutting up a fire rat's corpse 2 or 3 days old, so it wasn't unexpected. Even Kure had this smell. In any case, it's better than the smell of a battlefield in the summer. It eats away at your eyes and nose. But the breath of predators can also be pretty awful. The guy felt it himself. He grabbed a towel and said he was going to rinse his head, and then suggested that everyone move towards the hall. A little later, at the allotted time, they arrived at a hall that looked a bit like a tavern. There were many tables, and some of them were already occupied by other fighters. The attendant described the hall as being more of a community center. However, the ground floor turned out to be a pub. Chris noted that many such buildings were built with the conference hall on the 2nd floor. He sat down at the first table and suggested that the steel ones wait for the lecture at it. The team that accepted the offer began to take their places. One of the men at the next table turned to the team and grinned. He thought they were escorting some important person, but they were sitting there like ordinary guys. He called Liz, and she, hearing, turned to him. Approaching her, he put his arm around her shoulders and suggested that before she went chasing rats, why not pour him a couple of glasses? The girl calmly turned in his direction. Kazami, seeing this, only sighed dejectedly, and Chris suggested that he not pay attention to this. The man asked the servant more forcefully if she was ignoring him by any chance. Instead of a weakling who simply keeps quiet, wouldn't it be more fun to pour him a couple of glasses while wagging his tail? The girl began to squeeze the handle of her sword in irritation. Apparently her patience was already at its limit. Shingo, realizing that this could end very sadly, smiled and stood up from his chair, saying, "Why don't they stop this right now?" He noticed that the dog in his hands was a little rabid, so he shouldn't approach it. The man got very angry and shouted at Shingo to shut up, not interfering in their conversation. He extended his hand towards the guy, wanting to harm him, but at that moment Liz reacted, swinging her sword. Before she could do anything, the troublemaker was instantly thrown to the side and landed on the floor, hitting his back. She looked at what was happening in confusion and did not understand what was happening. Was it really earth magic? But Sarah clearly did not do this, because she was also shocked. An unknown man sitting not far from them smoked his cigarette and calmly turned the pages of the book in his hands. He told the defeated man to lie down. He wouldn't even open his eyes to such dirt, but it started to irritate him. The man with many scars on his face was clearly unhappy with the situation. The companion sitting opposite him watched and smiled slightly. Apparently he was used to this,